The scene opens in Yueyang, located in the north of the Hunan province, showing a wide view of the traditional town. The local townspeople cast suspicious and curious glances toward an unseen presence in their midst. A mysterious man sits silently in a courtyard as the surrounding crowd begins to whisper and mumble about him. While looking down with sweat dripping from his face, he quietly mumbles that everything moves just like the blowing wind. He remains still as time flows past him, eventually looking up as a single leaf rustles through the air. Staring up at the barren tree branches against the pale sky, he realizes a deep truth. He concludes that there is truly nothing left behind as the wind whistles and leaves swirl around him. He recalls rampaging across the world without fear, leaving a battlefield littered with broken weapons and blood. After destroying everything in the blink of an eye, he stands alone and stares toward a distant fortress guarded by an army. He ruthlessly eliminated every enemy in his path, striking absolute terror into the hearts of the soldiers facing him. His overwhelming power mocked the entire world as he unleashed massive energy slashes that decimated the opposition. His terrifying reputation earned him a legendary title, and he became known to all as the ultimate divine demon. He is known as the most vicious person in the entire world, regardless of age or location. Standing over a field of fallen enemies, the man finds the massacre boring, a sentiment fitting for the world's strongest warrior. As he walks away from the blood-soaked ground, ice suddenly surges from the earth and completely traps him. A mysterious figure mockingly clicks his tongue at the situation, prompting a fierce glare from the frozen man. This group is known as the Eight Immortals, a legendary team of powerful individuals who protect the Central Plains. Because he succumbed to his killer instincts and committed such cruelties, his captor expresses a strong desire to punish him immediately. The group expresses their deep frustration and sorrow that no one is strong enough to defeat or kill such an extremely evil person. Even while trapped behind layers of thick ice, the warrior's eyes glow with a terrifying and powerful light. The Eight Immortals surround the frozen body of the ultimate divine demon, Dan Wuqian, to ensure his capture. They decide to seal him away forever by dropping his frozen body into the deepest part of Dongting Lake. 1,000 years pass as the ultimate divine demon remains silently imprisoned in the dark depths after his defeat by the Eight Immortals. He thinks back to the Eight Immortals, noting that despite their grand name, they were just foolish people who backstabbed him. With a small smirk, he admits that the real reason for his defeat was simply because he was too weak. As he walks through the crowd, he realizes that everyone he once knew has long since disappeared from the world. He somberly reflects on the fact that no normal human could have survived the 1,000 years that passed during his imprisonment. Having no home or destination, he decides to wander aimlessly and live out his remaining days following the clouds and wind. A haunted look crosses his face as he feels like the ghosts of his past have finally caught up with him. Dan wonders if his nature has changed after 1,000 years of imprisonment while reflecting on his new life in this world. As he walks through the woods, he suddenly stops when he discovers a young girl lying motionless on the ground. He stands silently over the unconscious child, looking down at her small, helpless form. Noticing the girl's feverish and sickly face, he wonders if she is just a common beggar. After checking her weak pulse, he realizes that while she is still breathing, she only has about 4 hours left to live. The young girl is in critical condition, struggling to breathe as a high fever takes hold of her. Dan is suddenly struck by a realization as he looks down at the suffering child. Despite his vicious reputation, Dan tells the girl she is lucky and begins to channel his powerful energy into her. A soothing light surrounds the girl as the infusion of vitality begins to stabilize her condition. He is confident that the energy he provided will save her life, but he senses that another issue remains. A loud stomach growl reveals that while her life is saved, his energy cannot satisfy her extreme hunger. Dan searches for food, but only finds ancient pills, questioning if they are still effective after 1,000 years. He acknowledges that the pills could be dangerous, but he decides to use them since she will certainly die without help. As Dan walks away from the scene, the young girl suddenly gasps for air and begins to regain consciousness. Under the light of the crescent moon, Dan leaves the rest of the girl's recovery to her own luck. Birds chirp among the barren tree branches as the morning sun shines through the forest. Dan rests silently against a large tree while the peaceful sounds of nature surround him. He hears a soft rustling nearby and turns his head to see who is approaching. A warm, steaming dumpling wrapped in a white cloth is suddenly held out toward him. Dan stares in stunned silence as the young girl he saved offers him the food. Confused by the sudden gesture, Dan bluntly asks the child what she is holding. She happily identifies the food as a dumpling, her face lighting up with a cheerful smile. Dan clarifies his question, demanding to know why she is trying to give the food to him. The girl continues to stare at him with an innocent and expectant expression. He begins to wonder if the child is simply trying to repay him for saving her life. The young girl lets out a cute giggle, completely unfazed by Dan's cold and intimidating presence. Dan quickly turns his head away and firmly tells the girl that he is not going to eat it. He reflects on how unfamiliar it feels to meet someone who shows absolutely no fear or bloodlust toward him. The next day, the young girl returns to offer Dan a warm, steaming dumpling as he rests in the woods. By the day after next, Dan is already sharing his meals with the child as she sits comfortably right beside him. As half a month passes, Dan continues to eat the food the girl brings him every single day. He reflects on how her pure and innocent smile feels completely foreign to him, yet he finds that he doesn't actually dislike it. Dan walks through the busy town of Yueyang, blending into the crowd as life moves on around him. A loud shout suddenly stops him in his tracks, forcing him to turn and look toward the source of the noise. He watches as a man beats a child, screaming that he will teach her a lesson for stealing from him so many times. The man complains to the crowd about the girl's frequent thefts and asks what they intend to do about it. The girl tearfully apologizes while curled on the ground, but the man only mocks her for stealing from a nice person like himself. Dan remains silent as the man continues to demand payment for everything the child has stolen. The man loses his temper completely, screaming at the young girl for starting a life of crime at such a young age. Dan realizes the food he ate might have been stolen as the man demands the girl's parents appear and prepares to beat her again. Dan intervenes with a devastating kick, stopping the man's attack and protecting the terrified child on the ground. The man screams in pain as Dan's strike breaks all of his fingers, while Dan stares him down with a cold, expressionless face. The man screams in agony about his broken fingers, while the young girl lies injured on the ground next to the dropped food. Dan ignores the man's cries of pain and the staring crowd as he begins to walk away from the scene. As he leaves, Dan realizes that he has suddenly become incredibly annoyed by the entire situation. He recalls how the girl brought him food for the past half-month, and he had simply eaten it to survive without knowing its origin. Dan grits his teeth in anger as he realizes the girl was being beaten by others just to steal the food she shared with him. He continues to wander through the town, deeply troubled and confused by the intense feeling of displeasure rising within him. The scene shifts to a blurred landscape as the wind whistles through the trees. A heavy boot steps firmly onto the grass, signaling a traveler's arrival in the wilderness. Dan Wuchun stands before the rocky terrain, frustrated that his aimless wandering has brought him this far. His eyes widen in sudden shock as he realizes exactly where he is standing. He gazes at the massive lake, recognizing it as the very place that kept him imprisoned for a millennium. Staring at the calm waters of Dongting Lake, he reflects on his long years of isolation. He finds it unbelievable that the legendary martial god was trapped at the bottom of such a quiet and peaceful place. Turning his back on the water, he firmly decides that he will never have any business with this lake ever again. Dan notices a rustle in the bushes and realizes the young girl has been following him. Exhausted and covered in sweat, the girl gasps that she has finally found him. Dan is deeply confused as to why the girl is following him so closely after he only helped her once. He looks down at her with a stern expression and asks why she came looking for him. Clinging tightly to his clothes, the girl tearfully admits she doesn't want to be alone and begs him not to go. Dan reflects on his long, lonely life as a ruler and realizes that his isolation hasn't changed, even after 1,000 years. Softening his gaze, Dan looks at the child and asks her what her name is. The young girl looks up with wide eyes and reveals her name is Hwasomi. Dan wonders if their meeting is fate and if this child can create a place where he is finally needed. He gently pats her head and introduces himself as Dan Buchun. Standing before a massive waterfall, Dan tells Hwasomi to come with him. A crackling campfire burns brightly as Dan sits quietly with the sleeping child in the woods. As he watches Hwasomi sleep, Dan realizes that despite asking her to join him, he doesn't have a place for them to stay. Dan decides he must build a home, and wonders if his childhood dream of settling down is finally going to come true. Morning birds chirp as the sun rises over the peaceful forest. Hwasomi wakes up and slowly rubs the sleep from her eyes. She suddenly opens her eyes wide in complete shock at what she sees. Somi is stunned to find a grand, traditional house standing in the clearing where she fell asleep. As Somi looks around in confusion, Dan nonchalantly confirms that they are indeed inside a house. Somi is certain the building wasn't there yesterday and tries to question how it appeared so quickly. Dan avoids eye contact and insists the house was always there, claiming he only did some minor repairs to a rundown structure. He firmly repeats that the house existed yesterday, leaving the young girl completely speechless. Since he sounds so confident, Somi begins to doubt herself and wonders if her memory is simply playing tricks on her. Somi tries to convince herself that Dan is telling the truth, even though she knows a grand house made of rare red clay shouldn't just appear overnight. Somi is completely mesmerized by the size of the house, while Dan accidentally slips up and mentions how much effort he put into building it. Somi is startled by his choice of words, forcing a flustered Dan to quickly backtrack and insist he only meant he repaired the building. As Somi happily celebrates their new home, Dan reflects on how lucky he is that her youth makes her so easy to convince. Dan is suddenly caught off guard and turns serious when Somi points out the suspicious lack of any fences around the property. Somi happily wonders if the place was abandoned for a specific reason, while Dan remains silently annoyed in the background. By the next day, a grand and polished mansion stands before them, now surrounded by massive fences, making Somi look like a tiny speck in comparison. Somi is shocked to see massive fences suddenly appear, but Dan calmly claims they were always there from the start. Dan continues to insist the structure was there from the beginning, even though Somi hadn't even said anything yet. Somi stares up in awe at the incredibly high fence that now surrounds the property. Somi collapses onto the ground with a tired sigh while Dan watches her with a stoic expression. Dan asks what is bothering her as she looks up and calls out to him. Dan's eyes glow with intensity as Somi points out that the place feels empty because there aren't any flowers or trees. The next day, a beautiful courtyard with a pond and a large tree has suddenly appeared. Somi is amazed that these features weren't there yesterday, but Dan insists they were, and she eventually agrees. Somi is baffled by the sudden appearance of a pond and examines it closely. Dan watches her silently with a serious expression. Dan realizes he still has much to do, including building furniture one by one. He notes that he must also go fishing to ensure Somi doesn't starve. Dan finds that living a busy life like this isn't so bad after all. Somi tries to question him again, but Dan immediately notices her intent. He quickly silences her, with a finger to her lips. Dan nervously smiles, and tells her not to say another word about it. Somi calls out to Dan as she watches him work on something new. Curious about his progress, she asks Dan exactly what he is building in the courtyard. Dan explains that he has built a tub for her to bathe in, leaving the young girl completely puzzled. He clarifies that she needs to use the tub to wash up, but Somi remains silent and hesitant. As Somi tries to sneak away with cat-like reflexes, Dan immediately orders her to stop right there. Dan reveals he bought her new clothes after selling resources and insists she must be clean before she can wear them. Somi nervously giggles and tries to argue that she doesn't need a bath to look good. Dan bluntly tells her that while that might be true for him, it certainly isn't true for her as he lifts her up. Despite her loud protests and insistence that she's already clean, Dan completely ignores her complaints and drags her away to bathe anyway. Dan begins ruthlessly scrubbing the girl in the tub, surrounded by a massive mountain of soap bubbles. Shocked by the amount of dirt, Dan asks how long it's been since her last bath, while a tearful Somi admits she doesn't know. After the intense scrubbing, Somi emerges looking incredibly clean and radiant. Dan notes that she finally looks like a decent human being and asks if her new clothes fit properly. Somi excitedly confirms they fit, marveling at the fact that she has never worn such beautiful clothes before. Dan expresses his relief that the clothes fit as Somi happily dances around, overjoyed by her new look. Somi cheerfully tells Dan that she wouldn't mind even if the new clothes didn't fit her perfectly. She contentedly reflects on how her current situation is far better than the life of poverty and hunger she faced before. Somi heartens Dan by promising that she is happy with anything as long as they can stay together. Surprised by her maturity, Dan smiles warmly and notes how well-spoken the young girl is for her age. While gently patting her head, Dan expresses his deep desire for them to continue living a peaceful and quiet life together. Brimming with optimism, Somi smiles brightly and confidently declares that they can make that dream of a peaceful life come true. Dan agrees that a quiet life would be wonderful, unaware that mysterious figures are watching their home from the shadows at night. Rumors spread through the town about a manor suddenly appearing near Dongting Lake, with some claiming it's the work of a ghost since the land was empty just last week. A young man in fine clothing listens to the news and asks if these unbelievable rumors are actually true. His subordinate explains that the rumors are widespread despite no official confirmation, leading the skeptical man to decide to go see the site for himself. A group of soldiers marches through the night with torches, led by a stern-looking magistrate. The soldiers whisper amongst themselves, wondering why the magistrate seems to be in such a terrible mood. One soldier explains that bandits in the Hunan region have been causing chaos and harassing local villages lately. He notes the government is desperate to eliminate them, causing the magistrate immense stress, while another soldier wonders why no one has stopped them yet. The soldier reveals that the main problem is a notorious man named Zhang Baeksan. He describes Zhang Baeksan as the bandit leader, a man with first-rate martial arts skills that no ordinary person can match. He adds that the leader is also an expert horseman who is incredibly skilled at escaping whenever he faces a stronger opponent. Because they couldn't capture the leader himself, the government resorted to executing his family members instead. Because of his grudge, Jang Baeksan went on an uncontrollable rampage, but the group hopes the imperial family's upcoming extermination will finally ease the magistrate's worries. The magistrate reflects on how he hasn't been able to rest for an entire year before being suddenly startled by a shocking sight. They arrive at the location to find a massive grand manor standing where there should be nothing, leaving the entire group in stunned silence. One soldier struggles to believe his eyes, but he is forced to admit that the manor is definitely real and standing right before them. Overwhelmed by fear, the local people fall to their knees, praying to Buddha and begging for their lives to be spared. Despite the rumors of ghosts, the magistrate remains skeptical and decides they must go inside to see the truth for themselves. The magistrate is frozen in terror as a chilling, demonic presence looms over him like a monstrous beast. Sensing a powerful aura, the magistrate quickly turns around to find Dan Wuchun standing calmly in the distance. Dan remains silent for a moment before noting that he doesn't recall inviting any guests to his new home. Shaken by the intense bloodlust he felt, the magistrate asks if Dan is the owner of the manor, to which Dan calmly confirms his identity. The official introduces himself as Yueyang's magistrate, Hong Won-chang. While desperately trying to maintain his composure and government authority despite his fear, unimpressed by the magistrate's grand introduction, Dan simply identifies himself by his name. When questioned if he built the massive manor, Dan nonchalantly claims he only performed minor repairs on an abandoned house. Enraged by the excuse, the magistrate yells that the land belongs to the country and demands to know how Dan could build there without legal permission. The magistrate asks if Dan is feigning ignorance of the law, but Dan bluntly tells him to just grant the permission right now, leaving the official stunned. The magistrate is suddenly distracted as something hits the ground with a heavy thud between them. Dan presents a small white rabbit and asks the magistrate to overlook the legal matters in exchange for the gift. An intense spark of irritation flares between the two men as the magistrate's patience finally reaches its limit. Furious at the perceived mockery, the magistrate points his finger and orders his soldiers to capture Dan immediately. Dan decides to stay calm to avoid further trouble, feeling relieved that Somi is currently asleep and won't witness the conflict. The magistrate warns Dan that he messed with the wrong person today as the soldiers begin to lead him away. The magistrate threatens Dan with severe punishment beyond just flogging, while Dan's eyes glow with a terrifying and hidden power. Deeply disturbed by Dan's chilling gaze, the magistrate decides to finish the matter quickly so he can finally get some rest. Dan senses something strange just as the soldiers begin to lead him away. The soldiers are suddenly interrupted by a swift attack that leaves them screaming in pain. Confusion fills the air as the guards collapse to the ground one by one. Magistrate Hong is completely blindsided and demands to know who is responsible for the sudden chaos. A deadly rain of arrows pours down on the group, catching the remaining soldiers by surprise. The soldiers are ruthlessly struck down by the incoming projectiles. The magistrate stands in shock as he finds himself surrounded by the bodies of the fallen guards. The magistrate is paralyzed with fear as he tries to identify the source of the attack. A booming laugh echoes through the night as a mysterious figure calls out to the magistrate. A massive warrior emerges from the shadows, mocking the magistrate for his reckless behavior. The terrified official finally recognizes the man as the notorious bandit leader, Jang Baeksan. Jang Baeksan menacingly tells Hong Won-chang that his life ends today. The terrified magistrate trembles as the bandit leader looms over him. Hong Won-chang is overcome with sweat and panic as he realizes he has made a grave mistake. He reflects on the execution of Jang Baeksan's family half a year ago and laments that he never expected to be targeted so soon. Dan Wuchun watches the chaos with indifference, annoyed that the noise might wake the sleeping Somi, and concluding that the magistrate is useless. Desperate, Hong Won-chang grips his sword, realizing it is the only weapon he has left to defend himself. Surrounded by dozens of bandits under the moonlight, the magistrate knows he cannot possibly win with a single blade. He feels completely outmatched as he faces a group of first-rate martial masters, led by the notorious Jang Baeksan. The bandits demand Hong's death to avenge their fallen kin, while one of them violently seizes the terrified official. Paralyzed by fear, the magistrate desperately begs the bandits to spare his life. Jang Baeksan strikes the official, declaring that he has waited a long time for this moment of vengeance. The bandit leader laughs maniacally, savoring the total collapse of his enemy's authority. Jang Baeksan stares into the magistrate's eyes, wanting to see more terror, but deciding he cannot delay his revenge any longer. Looming like a demon, Jang Baeksan tells Hong Won-chang that today is the day he will finally die. Hong screams in pure terror as the leader orders his men to drag him away and subject him to a living hell. Dan Wuchun remains silent and unmoving as the magistrate is hauled off, still pleading for mercy from his captors. A bandit asks his leader what they should do about the mysterious man standing before them. Jang Baek-sun turns his attention toward Dan with a look of mild curiosity. Dan's hands remain tightly bound as he silently observes the unfolding chaos. The bandit leader acknowledges the situation with a calm and knowing expression. The bandit leader shatters his bindings with a sudden burst of energy and remarks that Dan would have been in great trouble if they hadn't arrived. One of the bandits laughs and mocks Dan, telling him that he should consider himself very lucky. Dan remains expressionless as he calmly rubs his wrists after breaking free from the ropes. Overcome with terror, Magistrate Hong desperately begs for his life and offers to do anything in exchange for mercy. Dan scratches his head in silence, appearing completely bored by the magistrate's desperate pleas. He calls out to the bandit leader, telling the man he calls Beardo to hold on for a moment. Insulted by the interruption, Jang Baek-sun asks if the brat is actually talking to him, while Dan questions what he intends to do with the official. Standing over the weeping magistrate, the bandit leader firmly declares his intent to kill him, just like his own family was killed. Dan bluntly points out that the bandit leader has likely killed just as many people as the official has. He suggests that the magistrate is simply taking his own form of revenge for the many lives the bandits have taken. The bandits are outraged by Dan's bold words, but Jang Baek-sun raises his hand and orders his men to stop. With a menacing grin, the bandit leader asks Dan exactly what it is he wants to do. Hong Won-chung breaks down in tears, while Dan watches him in cold silence. Dan calmly assesses the situation, noting that he is surrounded by about 50 bandits. Dan asks the terrified magistrate if he has a desire to survive this encounter. He offers to save the official on the condition that he never causes trouble for his manor again. The bandits are outraged by Dan's words and demand to know if he has a death wish. The magistrate is confused, wondering if Dan is referring to the grand manor they recently discovered. Desperate for his life, the magistrate agrees to the deal and promises to do anything if he is saved. A bandit violently kicks the official, telling him to shut up as he collapses in pain. Dan warns the bandits that if they stay quiet and stand down, they won't be harmed. One of the bandits scoffs at the idea of a peaceful resolution, furious at the mysterious man's calm and arrogant attitude despite being surrounded by dozens of armed men. The bandit unleashes a swift strike aimed directly at Dan's head. Dan remains completely calm and unfazed, even as the furious bandit launches a dangerous attack from above. A massive impact sends the bandits flying backward as a powerful energy erupts from the scene. The surrounding bandits stare in shock at the lifeless body of their comrade on the ground. The bandits cry out for their fallen ally, Jang Woo, while the magistrate watches the scene in disbelief. Jang Baek-sun is stunned, realizing that one of his strongest men was taken out so fast he couldn't even see the movement. The bandit leader begins to sense the true and dangerous nature of the man standing before him. Jang Baek-sun acknowledges that Dan might be more powerful than himself. Despite Dan's power, the leader believes they still have the advantage due to their superior numbers. Trusting in his past victories against martial masters, the bandit leader prepares his men for a full-scale assault. He expresses his hope that they can end the fight quickly by taking Dan down in an instant. Jang Baek-sun orders his men to kill Dan as the protagonist's eyes glow with a lethal and terrifying light. A bandit screams in agony as Dan Woo-chun unleashes a powerful blast. In that brief instant, Dan Woo-chun finds himself deep in thought. He coldly wonders if he should kill them, knowing it would be incredibly easy to end their lives. He knows he can take them down in a single strike, but the idea of spilling blood again gives him pause. The thought of returning to his violent past bothers him immensely as he reflects on his new life. He looks down in silence, contemplating the internal conflict between his old nature and current desires. A massive pillar of energy suddenly erupts from the ground, shaking the entire battlefield. Both the magistrate and the bandit leader are paralyzed with shock by the overwhelming display of power. Dan stands calmly amidst the swirling smoke, his presence alone commanding the entire scene. In less than a minute, Jang Baek-sun witnesses something so unbelievable it defies all reason. Just as a sword is thrown, Dan moves with blinding speed to intervene in the attack. He effortlessly shatters the flying weapon into 100 fragments using nothing but a small stone. The incredible feat completely annihilates all of the bandit leader's subordinates in an instant. Jang Baek-sun realizes that no normal person could have even seen such a movement at all. He wonders if such a thing is humanly possible, realizing Dan is in a league far beyond any martial master he has ever met. Terrified, he knows that taking even a single step forward would lead to his immediate death. Realizing his hopeless situation, Jang Baek-sun screams in terror and calls Dan a bastard. Forgetting his pride, the notorious bandit leader turns tail and runs away with every ounce of strength he has. He abandons his fallen men and for the first time in his life, flees in absolute terror. He continues to move his legs with all his might, Desperate to escape the monster behind him, Dan watches him flee, unimpressed by the bandit leader's surprising lack of courage. The magistrate cries out in denial as Dan looks back at him with a puzzled expression. Desperate, the official clings to Dan and begs him to catch the fleeing bandit leader. Dan finds the man despicable and notes that he usually hates going after someone who is running away. He realizes he must help the magistrate if he wants to resolve the legal issues with his manor without any further trouble. Seeing no other choice, Dan leaps into the air to chase down the runaway bandit. Dan moves with blinding speed, instantly catching up to the bandit leader. In a state of total shock, the bandit leader wonders exactly when Dan managed to get so close to him. With a final crushing impact, Dan pins his opponent to the ground and brings the violent confrontation to an end. Meanwhile, the magistrate hangs helplessly from a tree branch after Dan pinned him there. Dan finally arrives back at the tree branch where the magistrate is pinned and calls out to him. Under the light of the full moon, Dan sits calmly on a tree branch and declares that their deal is now officially finished. Dan sternly asks if the magistrate understands his instructions, prompting the official to frantically agree and beg for his life. He warns the official never to target his manor again, and the terrified magistrate swears that no such thing will ever happen. Dan orders the official to keep their meeting a secret, while recalling Somi's advice to smile more so people won't be so afraid of his face. Forcing an incredibly awkward and creepy grin, Dan tells the magistrate that everything is fine as long as they have an understanding. The magistrate is paralyzed with absolute terror, convinced that he has just encountered a literal monster in the middle of nowhere. Vowing never to cross him, the magistrate decides he must do whatever Dan wants, and promises to stay far away from the manor and the mountains forever. The scene shifts to the bustling market of Yueyang in the north of the Hunan province. While listening to townspeople talk about the capture of Zhang Baeksan and his bandits, Somi admits that living alone in the forest with Dan was actually a bit scary. Dan is surprised that she felt afraid even while they were together, though Somi playfully suggests she was only a little bit scared. Somi is relieved that the dangerous people have finally been caught as Dan gently takes her hand. They walk through the lively and crowded marketplace filled with the sounds of busy vendors and shoppers. Dan reflects on how the local bandits are gone and his legal troubles are resolved, concluding he has everything he needs before something catches his eye. A colorful and delicious variety of street food skewers, including glazed fruits and grilled seafood, are displayed before them. Somi is completely overwhelmed with excitement and joy at the sight of the tasty treats. She eagerly asks Dan if he agrees that the food looks amazing, while he remains silent and observant. Looking at his empty hand, Dan realizes he forgot one crucial detail, and concludes that he needs money to properly raise a child. Standing in the middle of the busy market, Dan decides that he will need to acquire a significant amount of funds for their future. Dan reflects on how, when he was alone, he could sleep anywhere as long as he could lie down. He recalls how he used to hunt for his own food whenever he was hungry during his solitary travels. Having lived a nomadic life since he was young, Dan realizes he has no idea how to earn money, yet he knows he needs plenty to take responsibility for Somi's life. Realizing his lack of funds, Dan decides it is time to head back, and Somi happily agrees to follow him. He determines that he must find a way to earn money as quickly as possible, while Somi struggles to keep up with his fast pace. While traveling through the woods, Somi excitedly calls out for Dan to look at something she has discovered. Somi starts digging frantically in the ground, leaving Dan puzzled as he waits for her to finish. She insists that she is almost finished with her task. As she continues to dig deep into the earth, Dan watches her with a skeptical expression and asks what she is doing so suddenly and out of nowhere. Somi reveals her plan to take a beautiful flower she found back home so she can plant it in their garden. Dan skeptically asks the young girl if she is actually capable of digging up the well-rooted plant. Although Dan notes the flower is rooted firmly, Somi confidently flexes her muscles and declares that she is quite strong. As Dan watches her struggle, he is suddenly struck by a shocking realization about their surroundings. Dan notices strange footprints that don't belong to them, which is suspicious since they should be the only ones in the area. Noticing the weeds were recently removed, Dan wonders if someone planted the flower there intentionally, while Somi continues to pull with all her might. With a loud cry, Somi finally pulls a large dirt-covered object out of the ground. Somi proudly celebrates her success, but points out a strange pouch that came out with the flower, prompting Dan to suggest they check what is inside. Just as Somi excitedly reaches to open the pouch, a furious voice screams at them for daring to touch someone else's property. A mysterious young warrior suddenly leaps from the trees, launching a lethal downward strike toward the unsuspecting child. Somi looks up in complete confusion as the sharp blade descends rapidly toward her. Dan intervenes with lightning speed, effortlessly catching the attacker's weapon and causing it to fall to the ground. Dan firmly grabs the stranger's wrist and coldly demands to know who he is, leaving the young attacker completely stunned by his overwhelming power. The young attacker is deeply unsettled, wondering what kind of person he has just encountered. He screams in agony as Dan ruthlessly crushes his hand with overwhelming force. Staring into Dan's cold eyes, the attacker is paralyzed with shock, unable to comprehend how someone could be this powerful. With an effortless motion, Dan throws the young warrior aside like he is nothing. The attacker crashes violently into the earth, the impact shattering the ground beneath him. He lies defeated and gasping for air as Dan stands calmly in the distance with Somi. Overwhelmed by the sudden violence, Somi's eyes go wide before she loses consciousness and begins to fall. Dan quickly catches the girl, wondering if the sheer shock of the event caused her to faint. Gritting his teeth in anger, Dan notes he was aware of the intruder, but never expected a direct attack on the child. He reflects that he would have killed the boy instantly if Somi had been hurt, realizing the attacker was likely only trying to scare them. Calming his rage, Dan decides the boy wasn't completely insane and turns his attention to the mysterious object Somi dug up. He carefully begins to open the dirt-covered pouch to see what is inside. Dan's eyes widen in surprise as he discovers the contents of the bag. A sinister and knowing grin spreads across Dan's face as he realizes the value of his find. Deciding the boy might be useful, Dan carries both the unconscious attacker and Somi back to his manor. Later that night at the Grand Manor, the young attacker slowly regains consciousness with a pained groan. He bolts upright in bed, his heart racing as he tries to make sense of his surroundings. The boy frantically asks where he is, only to be interrupted by Dan asking if he has finally woken up. He looks up to see Dan standing menacingly in the doorway under the light of the full moon. Dan calmly introduces himself to the terrified young man. The boy is struck by an ominous sense of danger, feeling a chilling bloodlust just by looking into Dan's cold eyes. Dan looms over him like a predator, revealing that he had every intention of killing him the moment he targeted Somi. Dan mentions he changed his mind and asks the confused boy why he thinks that happened. Sitting by the bed, Dan explains that every life has a value and asks the boy how much his own life is worth. Terrified, the boy suggests his life is worth 1 million Nyang, hoping that answer is acceptable. Dan stares at him with a cold expression, making the boy insist that he truly believes he is worth that much. Dan scoffs at the idea, calling him a mere thief, and claiming he is actually only worth a single silver Nyang. He notes that while each person determines their own value, the boy seems very confident in his own abilities. With a chilling smile, Dan accepts the price of 1 million for his life, and another million as a fee for attempting to kill Somi. He reveals the final price is a staggering 5 million Nyang, leaving the young man completely speechless and horrified. Dan gives a terrifying look, declaring that this massive sum is the exact amount he must pay if he wishes to stay alive. Townswomen praise Magistrate Hong for his hard work and offer him food while he laughs off the attention. Although he is grateful for the hospitality, the magistrate insists that there is still important work to be finished. As the magistrate takes his leave, the women watch him go, thinking about how impressive he is. Back in private, the magistrate screams in frustration as the pressure of his situation becomes overwhelming. He feels an immense amount of pressure now that everyone believes he was the one who captured the notorious Zhang Bexan. Since the commoners call him a hero and the government trusts him more, an elderly official asks for his help regarding a stolen golden Buddha statue. The official explains that the theft was undoubtedly carried out by an incredibly skilled thief. He asks the magistrate to help resolve the matter with total secrecy, hoping he can recover the treasure. The official believes that since the magistrate defeated Zhang Bexan alone, finding the thief will be an easy task for such a capable man. When asked if he can handle the mission, the magistrate nervously agrees despite his internal panic. The magistrate curses the thief for getting caught and putting him in this difficult position. The young warrior who attacks Somi is now covered in bruises as he prepares to sweep the floor. He wonders why the heavens have forced him to endure such a humiliating trial. Recalling last night, the boy is horrified by the 5 million Nyang debt, noting he has never seen that much money in his life. Dan Buchen stares him down with a cold expression, making the boy realize he is in serious trouble. Realizing Dan is serious, the boy begs for a chance to go get the money and bring it back later. Desperate for his life, the boy begs for mercy and promises to do whatever Dan commands. He offers to perform any task, including cleaning and laundry, just to be spared. The boy is paralyzed by fear, sensing that Dan will kill him instantly if he is upset. He desperately tells himself that he cannot afford to die in this place. While the boy claims he is good at cooking, Dan recalls the time he tried to cook for Somi and ended up burning all the food. He remembers how Somi politely refused to eat it, insisting it wasn't because it tasted bad, but because she simply wasn't hungry. Reflecting on the boy's confidence in cooking, Dan realizes he might actually be useful. Dan decides to keep the boy's belongings as collateral until the massive debt is paid in full. Dan warns that the debt will double if he flees, while the boy secretly vows to escape as soon as he survives this crisis. Returning to the present, the boy laments that he has spent a week as a servant being ordered around without rest. He blames Somi for his current situation, while wondering why she is constantly watching him. The boy realizes that he is running out of time to resolve his situation. He determines that he must retrieve the stolen golden Buddha statue from the imperial residence before the black market dealer arrives at the meeting point. A magnificent and delicious feast is suddenly presented. Somi is completely overwhelmed with excitement at the sight of the incredible food. Dan compliments the boy's cooking skills and notes that he is much better suited for this than being a thief. The boy happily asks if they enjoy the meal, while Dan contemplates a fair payment for his services. Dan decides to pay him 3 silver nyangs a month, causing the boy to internally curse at the thought of actually working there. Having found the location of his stolen item, the boy determines to wait for the perfect chance to reclaim it and escape. Dan asks Somi if she is familiar with a certain famous saying. He explains that no matter how hard Sun Wukong tries to run, he remains within the palm of Buddha. While the boy pretends to agree, he secretly believes he could have escaped if not for the restrictions placed upon him. He's filled with indignation at the thought of a legendary thief being forced to perform menial cleaning and laundry. He reminds himself that he is a great thief who successfully stole from an imperial residence, a feat no one else has achieved. He fumes at the idea of being compared to ordinary thieves while he continues his chores. He remains confident that if he truly wanted to escape, no one in the world would be able to catch him. Frustrated and exhausted, he wonders why he is working so hard when things weren't supposed to go this way. Realizing 3 more days have passed, he knows he must meet the black market dealer soon, or he will be finished. He figures he won't be caught in such a secluded manner, but even if he was, he feels safe with Dan nearby. He reflects on his life as a thief who sells stolen goods and refuses to accept his role as someone else's servant. Dan informs the boy that he is taking Somi fishing and orders him to look after the house while they are away. The boy is stunned by the sudden and unexpected opportunity that has presented itself. He believes Dan has finally let his guard down after eating his cooking for the past few days. Seeing his golden opportunity, he promises to protect and clean the manor while they are gone. Dan warns him that his debt will double if he flees, but the boy insists he would never dare to defy his lord. He dismisses the threat, convinced that Dan will soon realize what it's truly like to be unable to escape. As Dan and Somi depart, the boy bids them a final farewell, certain that he is leaving this place forever. Somi calls out to Dan as they arrive at a beautiful waterfall. Holding a fishing rod, Somi asks why they are fishing when they already have plenty of food left. Dan nonchalantly claims there is no special reason for their sudden trip. Dan tells Somi to fish by herself for a while and promises to return soon after he finishes an errand. Somi cheerfully agrees to stay safely within the circle Dan drew on the ground. Dan praises her intelligence while secretly noting that he has placed a trap formation to make her invisible to people and animals. Somi happily waves goodbye and promises to catch plenty of fish for him. Dan smiles warmly and tells the young girl that he is looking forward to seeing what she catches. Magistrate Hong is overwhelmed with stress, panicking because he wasn't the one who actually caught the notorious bandit leader. As the magistrate continues to lament his situation, Dan suddenly appears behind him and catches him completely off guard. With a calm and knowing expression, Dan tells the terrified official that he has a good suggestion for him. He asks if the magistrate would like to work with him again. Meanwhile, the young thief runs away with all his might. The scene opens with a view of a grand traditional building under a bright sky. The young thief presents the stolen golden Buddha and expresses his desire to sell the valuable treasure. The one-eyed dealer offers 2 million Nayang, explaining that such a high-profile item is difficult to sell anywhere else. The thief quickly agrees to the price. The thief looks at the dealer as they finalize the high-stakes transaction. The dealer commends the boy for surviving such a dangerous heist, while the thief remains smugly confident in his skills. As they exchange the bag of money, the dealer warns him that the government is on high alert following the recent capture of Zhang Baeksan. He notes that the downfall of Hunan's greatest thief has caused a massive uproar, and might even lead to a promotion for the local magistrate. The thief assures the dealer he won't talk even if he gets caught, prompting the man to laugh off the concern. Sudden, heavy footsteps echo through the building as a group approaches rapidly. The doors are thrown open as a man shouts that there is serious trouble. Both the thief and the dealer are caught completely off guard by the sudden intrusion. A massive force of constables has completely surrounded the building to prevent any chance of escape. The dealer realizes they were secretly tipped off and furiously demands to know who was responsible. Sensing the danger, the thief prepares to take his leave, while the dealer watches him in shock. The dealer is stunned to realize that his wallet has been snatched right from his person. The thief mocks the man as he leaps through the roof, successfully escaping with the money and leaving the dealer to face the law. The main gates are kicked open as the authorities ordered the immediate capture of everyone inside. The constables move in quickly, pinning the suspects to the ground with overwhelming force. Magistrate Hong Won-chang arrives on the scene, looking stern and determined. He is shocked and relieved to find the legendary golden Buddha sitting right before his eyes. The magistrate confirms the statue's presence, while the thief's associate is dragged away in the background. Bound by ropes, the dealer, Hwang Mo, glares at the magistrate and vows that he won't be defeated so easily. Hong mocks the criminals, stating there is no way they will escape punishment for stealing such a treasure from the imperial residence. He reflects on how recovering such an important item will surely earn him the trust of the emperor himself. He reflects on the successful heist, noting that people will now believe it is truly possible to steal from the imperial residence. Hong wonders about the identity of the person who stole from the imperial residence, realizing this incident is even bigger than the capture of Zhang-Bek-sen. The sound of heavy breathing echoes across the hills as someone runs desperately through the landscape. Constables shout orders to capture the fleeing thief, who curses his luck as he frantically tries to escape their pursuit. He wonders why the guards are so persistent and realizes the heavy gold is slowing him down, knowing that getting caught means certain execution. Pushing himself to the limit, he decides to head toward the cliff in a final, desperate attempt to lose his pursuers. Exhausted and out of breath, he finally reaches the edge of the towering rocky cliffs. He collapses against the stone, gasping for air as his body begins to fail from the intense exertion. Just as he thinks he has finally shaken them off, he is horrified to find Dan already waiting for him at the top. Completely stunned, the boy asks how Dan could possibly be there, but Dan simply dismisses the question with indifference. Dan reminds the boy that he is still within the palm of Buddha, leaving the young thief speechless and frustrated. He stares down in disbelief, unable to accept that he has been cornered once again. Refusing to give up, the thief takes a leap of faith off the cliff to avoid being captured. He screams that he will never be caught as he falls, while Dan simply watches him with an amused laugh. The boy tumbles violently down the rocky slope, unable to control his descent. He plans to use his light footwork technique the moment he hits the ground to make a final escape. His plan is instantly crushed as Dan effortlessly catches him by the foot before he can even touch the ground. Dan mockingly advises him to climb down more safely next time, pointing out how much he has ruined his clothes. Terrified by the impossible speed and power, the boy wonders what kind of monster he is truly dealing with. No matter where he runs, he finds Dan already waiting for him at the docks. Even as he tries to flee on land, he is shocked to see Dan calmly sitting on a horse right in his path. He realizes with growing horror that Dan is appearing everywhere he turns, leaving him with no place to hide. As the sun begins to set, the thief's desperate cries echo through the mountains, wondering why he can't escape. Dan stands over the defeated boy, reminding him once again that there is no escaping his reach. Because he tried to flee, Dan declares that his debt has now doubled to 10 million Nyang. The stolen gold only covers 2 million, leaving 8 million still unpaid. The young thief screams in pure rage as he realizes he is now deeper in debt than ever before. Dan suddenly remembers that he still hasn't collected the massive bounty for capturing the bandit leader, Zhang-Bek-sen. With a satisfied smile, he decides to use the bounty money to buy plenty of delicious snacks for Somi. The young thief screams in frustration at the heavens, cursing his current situation. He furiously sweeps the courtyard, complaining about how annoying his chores have become, while Somi watches him from a distance. Somi is impressed by his work, noting that the house is now sparkling clean. He recalls how Dan caught him and forced him into brutal labor for a measly 3 silver Nyangs. Ironically, the gold coins Dan gives him as a reward were actually taken from the thief's own stash. Exhausted and defeated, the boy collapses onto a bench, lamenting his terrible luck. He remembers his many failed escape attempts, all of which ended with a severe beating from Dan. Realizing they're out of food, he sighs and prepares to go grocery shopping while Somi observes him. He treks through the remote woods, complaining about the distance and the need to use his martial arts to return before Dan finishes hunting. The thief suddenly senses someone behind him and turns to find a pair of eyes watching from the bushes. Somi is startled when she is discovered hiding behind a large tree. She nervously hopes she hasn't been caught, though it's clear she has. The boy bluntly asks why she is following him into the forest. Somi can only offer a cute giggle in response to his question. He sternly tells her to stop laughing and go home, fearing that Dan will kill him if anything happens to her. Somi clings to his clothes, tearfully admitting that she simply doesn't want to be alone. He sighs, explaining that he is heading to the streets and cannot bring her to places with so many people. The thief is terrified of Dan's wrath, but Somi promises to stay close and remain quiet during their trip. He worries about the wild animals in the area and the risk of Dan returning from hunting while they are gone. Resigned to his fate, the boy lifts Somi onto his shoulders and tells her to hold on tight. Somi is delighted by the sights of the forest, excitedly pointing out the various fruits and food she sees. Their peaceful walk is interrupted by a group of charging boars, forcing the thief to run for his life with Somi on his back. Somi is enchanted by the beautiful birds flying around them, seemingly unaware of any danger. After their long journey, the young girl eventually falls fast asleep on the boy's shoulders. The thief continues his trek, clicking his tongue in annoyance at his unexpected role as a babysitter. Somi is excited to arrive at the market, but the thief quickly tells her to stay quiet. The thief feels a chill as he notices several dangerous-looking men watching them closely. The rough men laugh mockingly as the thief passes by, carrying the young girl on his shoulders. He reflects on how dangerous the streets have become, especially since a major black market dealer was recently caught. He knows the dealer was caught with the stolen golden Buddha, and suspects the man has already been executed. A sudden, chilling thought stops him in his tracks. He realizes that he would face a terrible death if the authorities ever caught him for the same crime. Before he can react, a hand suddenly reaches out and snatches the young girl from his shoulders. A massive, scarred man kidnaps the girl and flees, while the innocent child remains completely unaware of the danger. The thief is paralyzed with terror, realizing that he is dead meat if anything happens to the girl. He screams in a panic and immediately begins chasing after the kidnapper. He is shocked by the kidnapper's speed and wonders if the man is a martial master, realizing the situation has become incredibly complicated. As the chase enters the forest, the thief begins to suspect that he is being intentionally lured somewhere. Overwhelmed by anxiety, he wonders if he is walking into a trap and struggles to understand why this is happening. The young thief runs in terror, imagining a demonic Dan Wuchen, demanding to know if he lost the child. He realizes that while Dan might save the girl, he himself will likely die at the hands of the kidnappers. Lamenting his miserable luck and his mistake in bringing Somi along, he tries to stay calm and activates his Qinggong technique, confident that no one can match his speed. Determined to avoid the trap, he focuses entirely on catching up to the kidnapper and rescuing Hua Somi. A sudden impact catches the thief off guard as he tries to protect the young girl from the kidnapper. Enraged, the thief screams at the bald man to put the child down immediately. The kidnapper only mocks him with a sinister laugh, telling him he should have spent more time looking at his surroundings. The thief is paralyzed with shock as he realizes he has been lured into a trap and is now completely surrounded by a large group of thugs. Before he can react, a heavy blow strikes him from behind, leaving him wondering when they managed to get so close. Meanwhile, Dan arrives back at the manor. He sits alone in the silence of the manor. Looking at his surroundings, he questions whether the manor had always been this big. Having grown accustomed to a noisy life, he realizes the manor feels far too quiet for him now. He suspects that Somi followed the thief, Zhang Samtai, into the streets. Dan is filled with concern as he reflects on the dangerous state of the town, knowing he must find Somi before she is harmed. The thugs ruthlessly beat the thief as he desperately curls his body to protect Somi, while Dan vows to find her in time. The thugs catch their breath, shocked by how much punishment the young man can take. Despite the brutal beating, Samtai refuses to give up, making the thugs realize how much he cares about the child he's protecting. A bloodied and beaten Samtai glares as the thugs order their men to seize the child. The lead thug cruelly threatens to torture the girl right in front of Samtai's eyes. A flashback to 12 years ago shows a young, happy girl waking up and calling out to her older brother, Samtai. He shows his sister the various items he managed to steal throughout the day. While his sister worries about the risks of his thievery, Samtai confidently tells her there is nothing to fear. With their parents gone, Samtai solemnly vows to protect his sister and keep her safe. He promises to care for her for the rest of her life, bringing a bright smile to her face. His sister is overjoyed when Samtai brings her a beautiful, high-quality robe. He explains how he carefully picked out the finest robe from a wealthy merchant's collection. But suddenly, he pulls the oversized robe off her, catching her completely by surprise. Because the people he robbed are dangerous, he tells his sister she must wait before wearing the robe in public. He tries to comfort his pouting sister, wishing he had been more careful about hiding the stolen clothes. Tragically, his sister never returned that night, leaving a young Samtai completely devastated. He searched everywhere for his sister. He finally found her lying alone in a deserted, narrow alleyway. It appeared she had found the clothes he had hidden and wore them out that night. This tragic event caused him to hate children from that day forward. He resents them because they are disobedient. The thugs revealed that a merchant leader was executed because of a stolen item he provided. They threatened to inflict even more pain on him as revenge for their fallen leader. Somi screams for them to let her go as a massive thug forcibly picks her up. The thug is shocked when a hand suddenly grabs his leg. A bloodied Samtai demands to know their plans for the girl before being brutally kicked in the face. Somi cries out in terror for her protector, Samtai, calling out to him as Mr. Slave while she is being carried away from him. She bites the thug's arm with all her might, causing him to scream in pain. The force of the struggle sends Somi tumbling to the ground as the thug yelps in agony. The enraged thug clutches his wounded arm and calls Somi a little brat for attacking him. Somi bravely stands her ground, spreading her arms to protect a badly injured Samtai from the approaching thugs. A bloodied and stunned Samtai can only stare in disbelief as the young girl shields him. With a look of pure confusion, Samtai demands to know what Somi thinks she is doing. The thug draws his sword in a blind rage, swearing to kill the little rat who bit him. Samtai desperately screams for Somi to run away and save herself. Somi firmly refuses to leave her protector behind, standing her ground despite the danger. A brief memory of a happy young girl flashes through Samtai's mind as he watches Somi. Terrified for her life, Samtai begs Somi to listen to him and run while she still can, warning her that she will die if she continues taking such a brutal beating. She refuses to run away, fearing that her companion will be left all alone to face the dangerous thugs. A bloodied and exhausted Samtai watches her in shock. Unable to believe her reckless bravery in the face of death, enraged by their defiance, the thug curses them and swings his blade down to finish them both off. Just as the strike is about to land, Dan suddenly appears and effortlessly catches the thug's arm mid-swing. The thug grunts in pain as Dan firmly crushes his arm with overwhelming strength. Somi is shocked to see her guardian and calls out to him with relief. Dan silently looks down at the young girl as she stares back at him. With a massive crash, the thug is sent flying as the others watch in complete disbelief. Dan wears a terrifying smile and promises the thugs that their deaths will be anything but easy. Samtai reflects on his sister and how much she hated being left alone in their poor home. He slowly opens his eyes as he begins to regain consciousness. Somi excitedly asks her protector if he is finally awake. He suddenly sits up and shouts at the young girl in a state of panic. Despite his own exhausted state, Samtai asks Somi if she is okay. He scolds Somi for risking her life to protect him instead of running away as he ordered. She quietly gazes at Samtai as he continues to lecture her. She points out that Samtai is the one covered in blood and is far more injured than she is. Samtai tries to recall what happened the day before, while Somi carefully patches up his wounds and tells him to stay still. He remembers the battle, where Dan coldly ordered Samtai to take Somi back home while they stood over the defeated thugs. Dan gives a terrifying warning, telling Samtai that if he is too weak to get up, he should just die there. Samtai remembers running for his life in a daze, having no memory of what happened after the confrontation. He tries to get Somi's attention while she holds a box of medical supplies. He firmly warns Somi never to protect him again, telling her that her own life is the most important thing. She flatly refuses to listen, showing her stubborn devotion to her protector. Somi stubbornly refuses to stop protecting him and declares that she will continue to do exactly the same thing in the future. She reveals her deep motivation, explaining that she never wants to lose another family member ever again. Samtai is stunned into silence as he realizes the young girl was fully aware that he had been trying to run away this whole time. She firmly asserts her resolve, making it clear that she has no intention of changing her mind. Somi confidently vows to become much stronger so she can protect everyone she cares about. Samtai is left speechless and realizes he is actually being scolded by a small child for his behavior. The morning air is filled with the loud cawing of a crow as it perches on a branch overlooking the lush forest. Magistrate Hong leads a group of torch-bearing guards through the dark forest as they investigate reports of a violent disturbance. Hong complains about his constant bad luck, frustrated that a massive group fight has broken out so close to the village. A nervous soldier interrupts the magistrate to report a very strange detail regarding the victims they found. He explains that every single one of the injured men has a brutally broken right cheek. Hong is horrified by the report and demands to know what kind of monster could have inflicted such specific and brutal injuries. A terrifying image of Dan Wuqian looms in Hong's mind as he realizes that it must have been that crazy bastard who did this. The magistrate and his men suddenly freeze in shock as they discover Dan standing in the middle of the carnage. A soldier begins to shout an insult at Dan, but Hong immediately cuts him off as he recognizes the terrifying warrior. Hong instantly switches to a fawning and overly polite tone, nervously asking the great warrior what brings him to the forest. Dan remains completely silent, offering only a cold and intimidating stare in response to the magistrate's greeting. Dan coldly explains that the defeated men were criminals attempting murder and kidnapping, identifying them as remnants of the black market group the magistrate previously arrested. Hong quickly orders his men to arrest the criminals, and the magistrate's guards rush to capture the remaining thugs, while questioning the identity of the mysterious warrior standing before them. The magistrate's guard notes that Hong has gained a public reputation as a hero who supposedly captured a bandit leader and recovered a stolen treasure through his own strength. They find it ironic that a man with such a legendary reputation would act so humble in front of a mere street thug. Dan shifts to a serious tone and asks the magistrate if he is familiar with the organization known as the Black Faction. Hong is visibly shaken by the name and demands to know how Dan could possibly know about such a notorious group. The Black Faction is a dangerous organization within the Central Plains that exclusively recruits the most violent vagrants and criminals. Possessing overwhelming strength and committing endless crimes, this group has been a major headache for the imperial family for decades. Dan explains that the recent attackers were agents of the Black Faction and suggests they have established a secret branch in Mount Heng. Magistrate Hong freezes in shock as Dan suddenly approaches him. Dan leans in close to the nervous magistrate and explains that since the group owes him a debt, he will help take them down. The scene shifts to the towering peaks of Mount Heng, where the Black Faction has established its secret base. Inside a grand hall, the branch leader demands to know why his men have failed to contact him as his subordinate tries to calm him down. Branch leader Young Hyuk-sung grows anxious, noting that his superiors are upset and that they invested too much effort into the black market trader. He tries to reassure himself that his elite forces will succeed, but he cannot hide his growing irritation. Young fumes over the capture of Jung Baek's son and the death of the traitor, vowing to personally kill the thief responsible for the mess. Suddenly, the hall is rocked by a massive explosion as Dan violently smashes through the entrance. The guards are thrown into a state of pure panic by the sudden and powerful intrusion. Dan emerges from the settling dust with a cold and terrifying gaze. Young Hyuk-sung glares at the intruder and demands to know who has dared to invade his stronghold. Following a swift confrontation, Dan stands over the defeated leader and coldly orders the guards to arrest everyone. The magistrate's men are left in total disbelief that such a dangerous faction was dismantled so easily. As the defeated enemy lies on the ground, several gold coins fall from his clothes. Dan looks at the gold coins and suddenly recalls how hungry and upset Somi had been earlier that day. He stops the magistrate's guards before they can take the body away and begins looting the fallen leader's belongings, hoping to find enough money to buy snacks for the young girl. Dan politely bids farewell as he prepares to depart with his massive haul, leaving the nervous guards to quickly agree and send him on his way. This was how Dan Woo-chin secured the funds he needed to support and raise young Somi and Jung Samtae. 3 months quickly pass by as peace returns to their lives. Soon, the warmth of summer arrives, bringing a vibrant change to the landscape. Utilizing the valuable treasures Dan recovered from the Black Faction, their daily lives become significantly more comfortable and luxurious. However, a new and unexpected problem quickly begins to arise. A pair of surprisingly chubby hands tightly grips a broom to sweep the courtyard. Dan watches in silent disbelief as a noticeably heavier Jung Samtae struggles to sweep the floor. He turns his gaze to see a heavily rounded Somi happily sitting by the pond, surrounded by delicious treats. The young girl cheerfully greets a passing fish, hungrily noting how delicious it looks. To Dan's immense worry, both Somi and Samtae have gained an extreme amount of weight. In truth, the blame for this situation lies entirely with Dan himself. Without thinking, he constantly brought home massive feasts, stuffing them completely full for every single meal. And this hilarious, chubby transformation is the direct result of his overprotective parenting. Because they were once hungry, and Samtae's cooking has become delicious, the duo is stuck in a cycle of constant eating and natural weight gain. Dan worries that as normal people without special arts, their current lifestyle will soon endanger their health. Dan orders the pair to approach him, and they clumsily waddle over to their master. Dan announces he will begin teaching Samtae martial arts, leaving the young man thrilled at the prospect of learning from a legendary master. When Dan tells Somi she will also be training, the young girl is filled with pure excitement. Dan sends them to buy martial arts books from the street, but Samtae questions the value of such cheap, third-rate manuals. Dan confidently explains that these basic books are perfect for their current level, much to Samtae's annoyance. A messy pile of various scrolls and books is dumped onto the ground for inspection. An exhausted Samtae presents the collection he found, while Dan begins to examine the scrolls. Dan picks up manuals for the Taiji fist and sword, feeling a strange sense of familiarity with names he can no longer fully recall. Samtae points out that the manuals belong to the famous Wudang sect, one of the 10 great sects. Dan finds the name of the sect's founder, Jung Sambong, to be quite interesting. A nervous Samtae realizes that Dan's casual attitude would normally provoke a life-or-death challenge from the Wudang Taoists. Dan completely ignores Samtai's worries and begins flipping through the pages of the manual. Ready to begin, Dan firmly grips the book and announces that their training starts now. Somi and Samtai start their practice with loud shouts, waddling clumsily across the wide courtyard. Somi flails her stick with excitement, while a completely exhausted Samtai lies on the ground gasping for breath. Dan is baffled by their awkward movements, but Samtai insists they are just following the drawings in the book. Dan explains that blindly following movements is boring and not the true way to master martial arts. He teaches them that martial arts have no fixed path and that manuals are just records of someone else's journey. Dan encourages them to move however they like, so they can eventually create their own unique style. Filled with new determination, Somi and Samtai happily agree to start their training their own way. Samtai collapses in total exhaustion, gasping for breath and begging to be killed because he can no longer handle the training. Somi excitedly shows off her movements to Dan, while a defeated Samtai remains sprawled on the ground. Dan laughs and praises their progress, telling them they both have the potential to become true martial artists. Dan reveals he only wanted Somi to exercise for her health, but she accidentally strikes a groaning Samtai during her practice. Dan feels confident that Somi will soon return to her original size if she keeps up this level of activity. Dan watches his students with a silent and thoughtful expression as a bright aura surrounds him. Dan silently sits before a massive feast, while Samtai excitedly tells Somi that it's a reward for all their hard work today, encouraging her to eat as much as she wants. Somi and Samtai waste no time and begin greedily stuffing their faces with the delicious food. Dan watches in silence as a flurry of hands grabs every piece of food on the table at lightning speed. Dan's voice curses in frustration as the morning sun rises over the grand manor nestled in the mountains. The duo finally returns to their original sizes after enduring harsh training, but Dan immediately shuts down their hopes of eating more to celebrate. A porcelain cup shatters against the floor with a loud crash. A terrified subordinate trembles as he bows deeply before his leader in the grand hall. The Wolf King of the Black Faction, Sima-chan, demands an explanation for the current situation. He reminds his subordinate of the massive financial contributions Zhang Baeksan and So Chu-yeon provide every year. Furious that both of them were captured, the cowering subordinate quickly agrees, but struggles to find the right words to explain the failure. A sudden, violent movement cuts through the air as the leader's anger flares. The subordinate reports that contact has been lost with both the Hunan branch and the team sent after Zhang Samtai. Looking over a bloodied body, the leader notes that the Hunan region has become unusually quiet. Sima-chan explains that Hunan was a perfect place for their business because few forces dared to oppose them. He recalls how Zhang Baeksan successfully suppressed any resistance during his rampage through the region. The leader realizes that someone is intentionally interfering with their operations and expresses his curiosity about who it could be. The guards declares that they will take immediate measures to deal with this interference. Sima-chan focuses his attention on Magistrate Hong and Zhang Samtai, the man who attempted to deal with So Chu-yeon. Sima-chan orders his men to capture and interrogate them to uncover the truth, receiving an immediate shout of obedience from his followers. Dan sits peacefully in the courtyard as a gentle breeze begins to blow through the manor. He senses a shift in the air and notes that the wind is picking up. Samtai collapses in exhaustion from the morning training, but Dan coldly orders him to get back on his feet. Dan announces it is time for breakfast with Somi, but an exhausted Samtai begs for just a little more rest. The sound of Dan's cracking knuckles instantly cures Samtai's fatigue, and he quickly agrees to get moving. A tiny bird rests peacefully on top of Somi's head as she enjoys the morning air. She sits in quiet meditation deep within the sunlit forest. Dan notices that Somi is already awake for the day. He tells her to go wash up because it is time for breakfast. Somi excitedly hugs Dan because she loves breakfast, and he tells her to calm down. Dan looks at her with warm expression. He stands in silence as a strong gust of wind blows through the courtyard. Samtai asks what is wrong, while Dan observes that the weather is especially windy today. Samtai agrees, but wonders why Dan is suddenly bringing up the wind. Dan orders Samtai to go investigate the situation in Yoyang, leaving the young man shocked because he hasn't eaten breakfast yet. With a terrifying glare, Dan repeats his command for Samtai to leave immediately. Samtai runs off toward the village, cursing Dan for making him leave before he could eat his meal. In the northern part of Hunan province, the scene shifts to the bustling city of Yoyang. A white-haired warrior with a wild appetite greedily devours a massive plate of food. This is Bang Chugok, the captain of the Black Faction's Wandering Wind Squad, who finishes his feast with a satisfied burp. A subordinate informs the captain that Magistrate Hong plans to transfer the captured bandit leader to the imperial family tomorrow. Bang Chugok finds the timing suspicious. noting that the magistrate has already held the prisoner for 3 months. He suspects the magistrate was trying to gather information, but knows his comrades won't break easily under a local authority. However, he worries that the imperial family is far more dangerous than a magistrate and might actually force the prisoner to speak. He decides they must either rescue their comrade or kill him themselves to ensure no evidence remains. After hearing that the local guards are short-handed, the captain coldly orders his men to eliminate them all. He believes it is easier to kill prisoners than rescue them, and plans to target the magistrate, Semte, and the mysterious master responsible for the mess. Bang Chugok wonders why powerful recluses are still interfering in the world when something suddenly catches his eye. He recognizes Zhang Samtai passing by and realizes that he is the same person from the composite drawing. At that moment, he realizes he may have found the key to uncovering the identity of the mysterious warrior. Zhang Samtai walks through the busy streets of Yoyang, unaware that he is being watched. The captain of the Wandering Wind Squad is frustrated by Samtai's surprising speed as he tries to keep up with him through the crowd. A foot quickly steps around a corner as Samtai maneuvers through the narrow city alleys. The stalker is pleased to see a dead end ahead, believing he has finally trapped his target. He is left in total shock when Samtai suddenly vanishes into thin air, leaving the alley completely empty. Back at the manor, Samtai frantically insists to Dan that his strange encounter in the city actually happened. A nervous Samtai explains that the city's atmosphere felt wrong, and that a weird fellow was stalking him right before he left. Dan listens calmly as Samtai expresses his deep concern that the Black Faction will never let him go easily. Dan demands a detailed explanation about the Black Faction, though a sweating Samtai admits there isn't much information to share. Samtai reveals that the organization was reportedly started 50 years ago by a mysterious individual whose identity remains a complete mystery. Rumors swirl about the mysterious Black Faction leader, suggesting he holds a deep grudge against the 10 great sects and might even originate from the demonic cult. Dan notes the lack of concrete information, while Samtai explains that the group was once so insignificant that no one paid them any attention. Samtai describes how the leader's sharp insight transformed the obscure group into a powerful force capable of intimidating the major sects. Dan observes that such a rapid rise would be incredibly frustrating for the major sects, who prioritize stability above all else. Samtai explains that pressure from the great families forced the Merm Alliance to act, driving the Black Faction into hiding, while Dan muses that the martial world remains unchanged by time. Dan reflects on the Merm Alliance being an organization formed by the key members of the Orthodox sects. He realizes the Black Faction leader must be exceptionally cunning to evade such a powerful alliance, noting that the current Merm has become far too peaceful compared to the past. He recalls his own era, when any group of vagrants would have been crushed mercilessly by those wanting to show off their strength. He finds the current state of the world incredibly boring compared to the violent past he once knew. While Samtai worries that the magistrate must be in a difficult situation, a silent Dan realizes he had completely forgotten about the man. Crows perch on barren branches as an ominous atmosphere settles over the region. Bang Chugok hums thoughtfully as he begins his interrogation. A bloodied and terrified magistrate Hong trembles as he faces his captors. The white-haired captain confirms the magistrate's identity while surrounded by his squad. The magistrate nervously confirms his identity to the dangerous warrior. Bang Chugok gleefully suggests that the magistrate is already well aware of the Black Faction's identity. As the captain prepares to ask questions, Hong regrets letting his guard down and not expecting the Black Faction to move so quickly. Hong asks him what he wants to know. The captain points out that he personally went after both the bandit leader and the black market dealer by himself, making him question how a mere magistrate could possess the power to single-handedly dismantle a Black Faction branch. He confidently asserts that someone powerful must be pulling the strings behind the scenes. A terrifying image of Dan Buchen flashes through the magistrate's mind as he realizes the truth. Noticing the magistrate's reaction, he realizes that he remembers something. He gives him a choice: speak voluntarily or be forced to talk. Hong remains silent and sweating profusely as he weighs the consequences of revealing Dan's identity. Despite the overwhelming pressure and the bodies of his fallen guards, the magistrate desperately claims to know nothing. Bang Chugok decides he has no choice but to take matters into his own hands. He notes that while Magistrate Hong looks brave on the outside, his lack of martial arts training makes him mentally weak and likely to die from the shock of torture. He asks the terrified magistrate if he knows what he is holding, while the man can only stare back in confusion. He blows a mysterious blue smoke into Hong's face, causing the magistrate to choke and gasp in distress. With a smug smile, he reveals that the substance he used is actually confession powder, Watching from above, Jung Sumtai curses as he sees the interrogation and the large group of enemies gathered below. He worries that things will get complicated if the magistrate dies, and laments that he only has to intervene because of his master's orders. He recalls Dan telling him that Magistrate Hong is a valuable asset they need to keep alive, despite his own confusion about the man's importance. Even though he initially questioned why they needed the magistrate, Samtai knows he cannot ignore his master's clear instructions. He remembers Dan's silent and intimidating gaze, which left him with no room for argument. Samtai realizes his master will likely beat him to death if he returns alone, leaving him with no choice but to find a way to save the magistrate. Stealing his resolve, Samtai prepares to risk his life once again, as he makes a sudden and explosive move to intervene. Bang Chugok is caught off guard as he notices something strange happening nearby. With a powerful shout, Samtai launches a surprise kick that sends a guard reeling. Samtai admits that the only move he can pull off is a surprise attack. He immediately makes a break for it, carrying the magistrate away at high speed. Bang Chugok recognizes the intruder as Jung Samtai and orders his men to hunt them down. Samtai panics as the enemies close in much faster than he expected. Terrified, Samtai desperately calls out for his master to come and save him. Samtai laments the fact that he has no choice but to put his faith in a monster like Dan. A sharp sound echoes through the night as a blade is slowly drawn from its scabbard. Dan stands alone in the moonlit forest, holding his sword ready as a powerful gust of wind begins to howl around him. The cold steel of the blade glints dangerously under the light of the crescent moon. Dan remains perfectly silent for a moment before a chilling and confident smirk grows across his face. As his enemies close in, Samtai desperately sprints through the forest with the magistrate on his back. Dan witnesses the scene and realizes that it is finally time for him to make his move. A cold wind whistles through the dark forest. The injured magistrate groans in pain as he lies bloodied on the forest floor. A hand suddenly covers the magistrate's mouth, ordering him to remain silent. Samtai warns the official that they must stay quiet to avoid being spotted by the pursuing enemies. The confused magistrate asks for his savior's identity, and Samtai introduces himself as a subordinate of Lord Dan. The magistrate is filled with relief as he recognizes the name of the powerful warrior. Samtai admits that the magistrate owes his life to Dan, and notes that his survival is key to ensuring a peaceful life for Somi. He realizes that before they can exploit the magistrate's debt, they must first find a way to escape the forest safely. Samtai senses the approaching enemies, and knows they will never stop their pursuit until they are dead. Terror strikes as the creepy enemies close in, leaving both Samtai and the magistrate screaming in absolute horror. Cursing his constant bad luck, Samtai grabs the magistrate and makes a desperate run for his life. The moon hangs high over the silent, rocky peaks of the mountain forest. Samtai gasps for breath as he stands guard over the injured magistrate, while a mysterious figure blocks their path. Seeing more enemies approach, a sweating Samtai realizes they are cornered and have no choice but to stand their ground. He takes a firm fighting stance, determined to protect the fallen official despite his own exhaustion. An irritated Bang Chugok catches his breath and curses the duo for being such persistent nuisances. The Black Faction assassins launch a lethal aerial assault, shouting for their targets to meet their end. Samtai watches the incoming attack with a serious and focused expression. He defiantly yells for them to bring it on, ready to fight to the very end. Bang Chugok looks up in shock as a sudden flash of movement catches his attention. Dan descends from the sky, effortlessly cutting through the Black Faction assassins in a single, fluid motion. The defeated enemies fall like rain, as Dan lands gracefully, having completely neutralized the aerial threat. A terrified assassin demands to know the identity of the mysterious intruder as he realizes they are completely outmatched. Bang Chugok can only watch in stunned silence as his elite squad is decimated in the blink of an eye. A narrator explains that throughout the history of the Central Plains, only one martial artist has ever earned the title of martial god. Not even legendary figures like San Feng, the founder of the Wudang sect, who attained immortality, or Dharma, the one who established the core systems of the Shaolin Temple, or even the powerful heavenly demon, who once ruled over the entire demonic cult, could claim that prestigious title. Bang Chugok breaks out in a cold sweat, questioning how anyone could possess such an overwhelming and terrifying level of martial prowess. While those legends were the strongest of their times, only the martial god remained truly undefeated, naturally becoming a living legend. Samtai angrily demands to know why Dan arrived so late, but his master coldly orders him to be quiet. Samtai points an accusatory finger at the enemies, blaming them for everything that has happened. The terrified Black Faction guards and Bang Chugok are left in total shock, wondering what they could have possibly done to provoke such a terrifying situation. Dan fixes the group with an intimidating stare and asks if they are truly members of the Black Faction. A trembling and sweating Bang Chugok confirms their identity and nervously asks if Dan really intends to stand in their way. Dan dismisses the entire organization as a pile of trash and mocks the captain for being far too talkative. With a terrifying expression, Dan challenges the captain to prove his worth if he disagrees with being called trash. Magistrate Hong watches in pure awe, declaring that Dan is truly an amazing and legendary warrior. Dan moves with lethal precision, effortlessly cutting through the Black Faction assassins in a brutal and blood-soaked display of power. As the moon shines over the mountain forest, Sumtai scoffs at the magistrate's praise and questions if such a monster could even be considered human. Magistrate Hong is visibly shocked by the comment and asks Sumtai if he is actually daring to insult his own master. Sumtai dismissively states he would even insult the emperor if no one were listening, causing an outraged Magistrate Hong to scream at him for being a lowly servant. Furious, Sumtai grabs the official and reminds him that he was the one who saved his life. But Hong continues to curse him and demands respect for his status as a master. As they grab each other's collars, Hong threatens to have the servant flogged to straighten him out while Sumtai calls him a condescending freak. Their petty argument is instantly silenced by a single command from Dan, leaving them frozen in fear while the defeated Bang Chugok lies bloodied on the ground. Standing stoically over the carnage and covered in the blood of his enemies, Dan coldly announces that it is finally time for them to return home. The next day, the government office is left in shock after a violent break-in occurs early in the morning. Every single imprisoned criminal has been slaughtered, leaving any survivors in such a critical state that they aren't expected to live much longer. To make matters worse, Magistrate Hong has completely vanished without leaving a single trace behind. The entire city of Yoyang is thrown into an uproar as a search team is quickly formed to find the missing magistrate. Locals in a tavern whisper in fear, convinced that the ruthless Black Faction must be behind the sudden disappearance. While some mourn the magistrate's likely assassination and the dumping of his body, others quickly scold them for being so pessimistic. A man passionately defends the magistrate's character, praising his integrity for daring to challenge the Black Faction despite the immense danger. Inspired by the magistrate's bravery, they firmly decides to volunteer for the search team and help find him. Locals at a tavern firmly believe that a great person like the magistrate could never have died at the hands of the Black Faction. One man becomes overcome with emotion just thinking about the situation and prays for the magistrate's safety. The scene shifts to Dan's grand and peaceful manor, nestled among towering mountains and tall trees. Magistrate Hong stands inside the manor, looking surprisingly calm as he gazes at Somi with a gentle smile. Nearby, Dan holds a young Somi, who appears shy and hesitant in the presence of their guest. Somi nervously whispers that a stranger is staring at her, while Hong realizes the young girl must be the daughter of his savior. Dan introduces the magistrate to Somi, noting her shyness, while Hong observes the resemblance between the two. Peeking out from Dan's protective hold, the young girl timidly introduces herself as Hua Somi. Hong Won-chung introduces himself with a warm laugh, finding Somi adorable and inviting her to play with his son whenever she likes. As Somi clings tightly to Dan, she thoughtfully repeats the idea of becoming friends with the magistrate's son. While Hong secretly thinks Somi would make a perfect daughter-in-law, Dan senses his thoughts and shuts them down with a terrifying glare. Hong laughs nervously while trying to act nonchalant and feign ignorance. An ominous view of the forest landscape sets a tense mood for the unfolding events. The Black Faction leader, Sima Chan, is shocked to learn that communication with his men has been completely cut off. A trembling subordinate confirms the news as the boss questions why the targets they were supposed to handle are suddenly causing problems. He expresses disbelief over the magistrate's disappearance and trusts that Bang Chugok wouldn't have failed her mission despite the headache the situation is causing him. The nervous subordinate reports that they haven't found anything despite a thorough search, leading Sima Chan to coldly ask about the probability that they are dead. The subordinate estimates a low chance of death, but Sima Chan angrily slams his throne, suggesting they might have been killed by the mysterious recluse martial master. The subordinate points out that their last report mentioned nothing of a master, and argues that such a figure would have likely caused their mission to fail entirely. Sima-chan sighs in deep frustration as he contemplates the seriousness of the situation. He senses that something has already gone terribly wrong and admits that he has a very bad feeling about the entire situation. He orders his subordinate to form another search team and gather those capable of moving covertly. He emphasizes the need for a thorough search throughout Hunan and instructs them to choose veteran members for the task. Dan assigns Sumtai to protect the manor and guard the prisoners while the magistrate prepares to lead constables back to Yueyang. He identifies his destination as Tianzi Mountain, the location of the Black Faction's headquarters revealed by Bang Chugok. With a serious expression, Dan declares that he will go to the headquarters personally. Samtai and the magistrate are left in total shock by Dan's bold decision to face the enemy alone. Dan tells them not to worry about him and mocks their weakness for being unable to defeat even a single opponent. He tells them to become strong enough to avoid future beatings and questions if they feel embarrassed by their current lack of strength. An irritated Samtai mutters that Dan expects everyone to possess the same monstrous power as himself. The peaceful morning air is filled with the sound of birds chirping over the mountain range. Dan sets off on his journey, his steady footsteps echoing through the quiet forest. As he walks through the forest, he reflects on how refreshing it feels to finally leave the manor behind. Dan reflects on his youth, remembering how he always traveled alone through desolate places while focusing entirely on his martial arts training. He clenches his scarred fist with determination before opening his hand toward the sky. Looking back at his blood-soaked past, Dan wonders why he was once so obsessed with obtaining absolute strength. Watching Somi and Samtai happily run toward him, Dan realizes that this simple, peaceful life brings its own kind of joy. Dan's quiet moment is suddenly interrupted by a loud, aggressive shout from someone nearby. A large group of bandits surrounds Dan, demanding that he hand over everything he owns if he wants to pass through the forest. Unfazed by the threat, Dan calmly notes how long it has been since he was challenged like this, and asks what they will do if he has nothing to give. The bandits laugh at his response and prepare to search him, but they are suddenly cut off by a furious scream calling them out. An unknown voice accuses the group of being the bandits responsible for the mess in the area, leaving the thugs completely confused. A newcomer makes a sudden and graceful entrance, landing firmly on a branch overlooking the confrontation. A woman in a blue robe appears and scolds the bandits, telling them they should be deeply ashamed for ganging up on a single person. Namgung Sohye, a member of the Murim alliance from the prestigious Namgung family, expresses her disgust at a group of strong men bullying the weak and tells them they should be ashamed of themselves. The confused bandits are baffled by her sudden arrival and mockingly question if she actually plans to take them all on by herself. With a powerful shout, she unleashes a graceful sword technique that fills the air with a flurry of pink petals. She effortlessly strikes down one of the thugs, leaving a stunned Dan to watch as she intervenes on his behalf. Having dealt with the immediate threat, she stands with quiet confidence as the petals settle around her. She scoffs at the situation and begins to brush herself off while standing beside the silent warrior she believes she just rescued. She tells the man he was lucky she showed up to save him from a difficult situation. Dan stares back in silence, completely confused by her sudden intervention. She becomes flustered and asks why he is staring at her face so intently. She realizes he isn't looking at her face, but at the sword she is holding. Dan offers a rare smile and compliments her on her impressive swordsmanship. She proudly assumes he was shocked by her skills and notes that she overheard his praise. While she basks in her pride, Dan ignores her and begins looting the fallen bandits. She is horrified to see him taking money from the bandits, but Dan bluntly explains he is just collecting his due. He reasons that the bandits likely stole the money anyway and claims he is simply picking it up. He casually flips a coin to her, stating that it belongs to her now. She catches the silver coin in total disbelief. Stunned by his casual attitude toward looting, she is left speechless, shocked that the man she rescued is shamelessly plundering the fallen bandits right in front of her. Frustrated by his behavior, she shouts for him to stop as he begins to walk away. She quickly steps in front of him, demanding his full attention. She demands more of the loot, but Dan calmly informs her that the single coin is all she is getting. Accusing him of lying and hogging all the profits, she grows even more enraged when Dan continues to ignore her complaints. Grumbling to herself, she questions what she's even supposed to do with a single silver coin. Dan observes her reaction and realizes she must come from a wealthy background to look down on a silver coin. She proudly admits that she has never experienced hunger in her life, leading Dan to simply acknowledge her statement. With a mocking smirk, Dan asks if her privileged upbringing is the reason she fights with such an arrogant attitude. Offended by his blunt remark, she glares at him and demands to know exactly what he just said. She is caught off guard by a sudden movement as pink petals swirl around her. She groans in confusion as she is suddenly moved through the air. She looks around in total shock, wondering where the man she was talking to has suddenly vanished. She is left completely stunned, questioning what just happened. The scene shifts to Hunan Province near Tianzi Mountain, the location of the Black Faction's headquarters. A quiet and desolate village sits at the base of the mountain range. The sound of a bustling restaurant fills the air as a customer orders a bowl of noodles. Dan reflects on his encounter with the woman, annoyed that he wasted time on such a troublesome person. The owner watches in silence as Dan focuses on slurping his meal. He continues to eat his meal in silence, ignoring everything around him. The locals watch the mysterious warrior from a distance. Other patrons continue their drinks, clearing their throats as the atmosphere remains quiet. A hand slams firmly onto the table as Dan finishes his meal. The owner cheerfully wishes him a safe journey as Dan steps out into the sunlight with a neutral expression. He begins walking toward his destination with steady, rhythmic footsteps. Suddenly, he stops in his tracks as a strange sensation washes over him. Dan stands in total silence, staring ahead at the path leading to the Black Faction stronghold. He remembers the locals watching him suspiciously from a distance, sensing his unusual aura. Dan covers his mouth with his bandaged hand, feeling a sudden surge of internal pressure. He stares at his palm in shock as a dark bloodstain begins to soak through his bandages. Blood drips from Dan's blade as he continues his relentless march through the enemy base. He stands amidst a sea of defeated warriors, having effortlessly cut through the initial wave of defenders. Dan suspects that his meal was tampered with as he feels a strange sensation deep within his body. He observes the eerie village, noting the lifeless expressions of the residents and the dark energy lingering in the air. Realizing the entire settlement is a hideout for the Black Faction, he pauses to consider his next move. He suddenly senses an approaching threat and stops to prepare for the coming battle. A new squad of assassins surrounds him, but Dan remains completely unfazed by their presence. Inside the headquarters, a terrified guard screams that they are in serious trouble as the invasion begins. Sima-chan asks about his missing men, only to be told that their own base is being ambushed. The leader is shocked to hear that their entire organization is being dismantled by a single powerful martial master. Sima-chan refuses to believe that one person could possibly possess such overwhelming strength. The scout insists the intruder has already defeated 100 men and is heading straight for the leader. A massive explosion suddenly rocks the hall as Dan violently smashes through the final defenses. Sima-chan is paralyzed with shock as he stares at the intruder. Blood stains the floor, marking the trail of the violent confrontation. Dan's clothes are heavily soaked in the blood of the fallen guards. Dan stands stoically in the doorway, his blade drawn and ready for the final battle. For a brief second, Dan's cold gaze fixes on his target. Sima-chan breaks into a cold sweat as he instantly recognizes the man before him. He realizes this is the same person who has been systematically dismantling the Black Faction. He's baffled by the idea that one man defeated everyone on the first floor, and feels a terrifying pressure in the air. Sima-chan feels small and insignificant, as if Dan is looking down on him like a mere bug. He grips his sword, determined to find out who is truly stronger through a direct clash. Before he can even react, Sima-chan is sent flying through the wall in total shock. The quiet morning settles over the watchtower of the recently dismantled Black Faction branch. Magistrate Hong wastes no time and loudly orders his men to arrest every criminal on the site immediately. He demands that the guards tie up every single person tightly, leaving his soldiers confused about the identity of the dangerous group they are capturing. Hong identifies them as the notorious Black Faction bandits, and warns his men to keep their guard up while they secure the headquarters. The guards are frozen in shock at the mention of the legendary criminal organization, but Hong firmly insists that they cannot allow a single member to escape. Defeated and bound, several Black Faction members sit helplessly on the ground as the magistrate's men take control of the area. The soldiers immediately shout their obedience to the magistrate's commands as they continue the mass arrest. Hong can't help but chuckle at the unbelievable scene, admitting that he is just as shocked as his men by the sudden turn of events. He reflects on the incredible reality that a single man has managed to achieve what the Imperial family and the Murim Alliance failed to do for decades. Surrounded by a bright and flowery aura, the magistrate is left in total awe, wondering about the true identity of the mysterious warrior who possesses such godlike power. Sima-chan crashes violently into the ground, while Magistrate Hong walks by cheerfully, completely unaware of the carnage. Hong stops in his tracks and is visibly shaken by the sight of the bloodied body lying before him. The defeated Sima-chan coughs up blood, clinging to what remains of his life after the brutal confrontation. Hong stares in disbelief as he begins to recognize the identity of the fallen man. He's horrified to realize that the man before him is none other than the notorious leader of the Black Faction. Instantly switching to his fawning persona, Hong enthusiastically praises Dan as a legendary and great warrior. Covered in the blood of his enemies, Dan calmly announces that his work at the headquarters is finally finished. He decides to leave immediately, noting that he promised Somi he would return home early. Hong bows deeply in gratitude and promises to handle the remaining details before seeking Dan out again. Dan gives the magistrate a stern and serious look, telling him not to forget their arrangement. A confused Hong asks for clarification, unsure of exactly what Dan is referring to. He quickly realizes the importance of secrecy and joyfully vows to keep quiet about everything he has witnessed. Dan sternly corrects the magistrate, stating that his interest lies elsewhere. He clarifies that he is actually referring to the bounty rewards for capturing the criminals. The magistrate awkwardly agrees, realizing his misunderstanding of the situation. The defeated Black faction members are securely bound as they are taken into custody. The townspeople celebrate the capture of the criminals, shouting insults at the defeated villains as they are marched away. Locals are stunned by the fall of the Black faction, wondering if the magistrate's incredible achievement will lead to a promotion. Captain Namgung Sohye of the Murim Alliance senses that something about this victory is not quite right. She finds it impossible that a simple magistrate located a hidden base and defeated elite masters using only local guards. Despite the suspicions, the magistrate continues to enjoy his newfound reputation as a public hero. Sohye is convinced a secret power is pulling the strings, but she is left wondering who could possibly be responsible. At the Murim Alliance headquarters, a high-ranking official observes that the rumors regarding the Black faction's downfall appear to be true. He concludes that a powerful martial master must be assisting the local magistrate. An advisor notes that such an incredible achievement would be impossible for a normal magistrate to accomplish alone. The leader agrees with the assessment as they discuss the mysterious power behind the victory. He orders the captain of the Phoenix Squad to launch an immediate investigation into the matter, receiving a swift confirmation from his subordinate. The leader realizes they must identify and recruit this hidden master, predicting that the martial world is about to become very chaotic. Military advisor Jaegil Woon suggests that if the captain finds the master, they must be ready to use force to bring him in if he refuses to cooperate. Murim Alliance leader Namgung Chun remains cautious, noting that they have no idea if this mysterious individual will be friendly or hostile toward them. He decides that his questions will only be answered through direct contact. While back at the manor, Dan peacefully watches his wards as they continue their lively training. Sohye clutches her stomach in pain as sharp pangs of discomfort radiate through her body. She regrets her foolishness, realizing she shouldn't have indulged in so many sweets. She nervously imagines her grandfather, Namgung Chun, flying into a rage, certain that he would try to kill her if he saw her in such a pathetic state. Overwhelmed by her situation, she slumps to the floor and desperately wonders what she should do next. Suddenly, a small hand reaches out and offers her a warm, fluffy steamed bun. Little Somi stands there timidly, offering her own snack to the hungry warrior. Sohye is stunned by the gesture, as the young girl shyly claims she is already full. Sohye's eyes sparkle with pure joy as she gazes at the delicious gift. To Sohye, the little girl looks like a literal angel for being so incredibly kind. As she happily devours the tasty treat, she asks for the girl's name and learns she is Hwa Somi. Sohye introduces herself as Namgung Sohye and asks where Somi's parents are so she can personally thank them. Little Somi sadly reveals that she doesn't have any parents, while Dan gently places his bandaged hand on her head. Dan stands protectively beside the young girl and firmly declares that he is her father. Dan maintains a stoic expression while Somi looks up at her with a mix of surprise and admiration. Sohye is struck with sudden realization and shock as she recognizes the mysterious man standing before her. She points an accusing finger at Dan, remembering him as the arrogant warrior who once looked down on her swordsmanship in the forest. Dan gives a slight nod, calmly acknowledging their previous encounter without any hint of emotion. Sohye falls silent for a moment, her expression shifting as she becomes absolutely certain of her new plan. She is filled with excitement, convinced that the heavens have personally sent this powerful master to assist her. Sohye eagerly rushes toward Dan, claiming that fate has brought them back together, but he immediately shuts her down before she can get close. She complains that he is rejecting her before she even says anything, but a dismissive Dan repeats that he isn't interested in whatever she has to say as he walks away with Somi. Sohye desperately begs for help as Dan walks away, but he coldly questions why he should bother assisting her. Sohye reminds him of her previous help during the bandit attack, while Somi timidly addresses Dan as her father. She once again remembers the moment when Dan stood tall with his hand resting on Somi's head, firmly declaring himself to be her father. The young girl moves closer and tightly clings to Dan, seeking comfort in his embrace. Tucked safely in Dan's arms, Somi suggests that they should help the woman because she looks so pitiful. Dan is left speechless by the child's unexpected request, his expression filled with confusion. Somi continues to cheerily call out to her father, her face glowing with happiness. Dan is completely overwhelmed by the constant adorable calls for his attention. As the sun shines over the manor, Samtai impatiently orders Sohye to hurry up with the laundry and stop wasting time. A loud thud echoes through the courtyard as Sohee violently strikes the wet clothes with a wooden paddle. A frustrated Sohee complains about the stubborn dirt, realizing she has no choice but to work for her keep. Samtae relaxes as he lectures Sohee on how to properly do laundry, telling her to hit the clothes harder. Enraged, Sohee grabs Samtae by the collar, while he calmly explains that he is merely trying to teach her the household rules. Samtae laughs at her struggle, pointing out that she clearly underestimated how difficult it would be to ask for a favor. Sohee is left fuming and humiliated as she continues to deal with the chores. Exhausted and frustrated, Sohee collapses to the ground, questioning why she has to endure such treatment. Dan makes it clear that he won't help for free, offering to pay her a salary if she continues to assist with the household chores during her stay. Sohee is devastated, realizing that her simple request for a few silver coins has led to this grueling labor. An empty pouch lies on the ground, symbolizing the harsh reality she now faces. Meanwhile, a chest filled with 100 gold naang sparkles, representing the massive bounty rewards Dan secured. Dan is amazed that Hong managed to obtain so much gold so quickly, though Hong considers it a small reward compared to what Warrior Dan has done for him. Dan asks about the situation, and Hong explains that the captured Black Faction members have been handed over to the Eastern Bureau, a Ming Dynasty spy and secret police agency run by eunuchs, created by the young emperor, where they are unlikely to survive. He asks if the entire situation is finally resolved, and the magistrate confirms that everything has been settled. Dan enjoys a quiet moment over tea while the magistrate's attention shifts as he listens to the sound of laughter nearby. From inside the manor, the two men watch as little Somi runs through the courtyard with pure, infectious joy. Hong warmly remarks on how kind and adorable the young girl has become. Dan calmly acknowledges the truth. The magistrate suggests that it might finally be time for Dan to consider sending the young girl to a proper school. Dan is left visibly confused by the sudden suggestion. As little Somi plays by the pond, Dan begins to question whether he should send her to school. Magistrate Hong insists that children must attend school, claiming it is a major embarrassment if they cannot read or write. Dan remains skeptical, but the magistrate continues to argue that school is the best way to make friends and offers to introduce a great one. As Dan considers the offer, Somi is happily distracted by a large, flopping fish she found. The magistrate secretly smirks, believing Dan is convinced, and thinking about how his future daughter-in-law must be educated. A grand view of the massive manor highlights the beauty and scale of the magistrate's estate. Somi relaxes by the pond, admiring the colorful carp and the many interesting things in the garden. She is suddenly startled by a loud voice demanding to know her identity. An arrogant boy confronts Somi, claiming the house is his and demanding an explanation for her presence. As Somi hesitates to answer, the boy aggressively points at her and repeats his demand to know why she is there. A person steps forward firmly onto the stone path. Magistrate Hong furiously shouts at his son, Hong Jinrang, demanding to know why he is screaming at their guest. The boy is stunned by his father's sudden appearance, while a tearful Somi looks on in distress. The magistrate sternly asks his son if this is how he was raised, causing the boy to tremble in fear as he tries to explain himself. OC. Our text. Not only did you not treat our precious guest well, you dare scream at her? Precious guest? That's... Narration. Hong continues to lecture his son for failing to treat their precious guest with respect, leaving the boy speechless. Feeling defeated and gloomy, the boy quietly offers an apology while Somi watches in surprise. Somi kindly assures the magistrate that she is okay, but he remains deeply concerned for her well-being. She explains she was only startled and asks if this is the boy he mentioned, which the magistrate confirms with a smile. The magistrate orders his son to quickly apologize to Somi again, but the boy remains silent and resentful. Overcome with jealousy, the boy shakes with rage as he watches his father laugh happily with Somi. Screaming that he hates his father, the boy bursts into tears and runs away, leaving the magistrate stunned by his behavior. Somi holds Dan's hand and asks if the boy they just encountered was the magistrate's son. Dan confirms it and wonders if she can become friends with him, to which Somi happily agrees that they can be best friends. Dan then asks Somi for her thoughts on the idea of attending school. Surprised by the suggestion, Somi asks if she is truly allowed to go to school as well. Dan gives a warm smile and assures her she can go as long as it is something she wants to do. Somi's eyes sparkle with pure excitement and joy at the wonderful news. Overjoyed, Somi jumps around and shouts her desire to go to school, while Dan agrees to let her. As night falls over the manor, the sounds of intense martial arts training echo through the courtyard. Dan watches as Somi and Samtae practice their forms, with Somi noting the sound of the wind created by their movements. Namgung Sohee questions if sending her to the famous Chongsong school is wise, but Dan dismisses her concerns by saying a school is just a school. Dan questions if the famous school is truly as impressive as it seems. Sohee warns him that he lacks worldly knowledge, explaining that more prestigious schools make it much harder for children to fit in. Dan observes that she speaks from personal experience, and she quietly admits that is the case. She reveals that she once changed her name just to enter a school, which ended up causing a massive scene. Thinking back to her younger self, Sohee recalls how she solved her school problems by beating up all the other students. Dan remains confident that Somi will be fine because she is strong, promising to personally intervene if she ever faces a problem she cannot solve. When Sohee asks if this protective nature is because he is her father, Dan firmly confirms his role, while Somi continues her training. Sohee questions if he can truly stand his ground against a greater power, privately doubting him since he appears to have no martial arts skills or influence beyond his manner. She wonders if he could survive the pressure of a powerful family or government officials, but she ultimately decides it is none of her business since she will be leaving soon. With a look of absolute resolve, Dan declares that he will protect Somi with every ounce of strength he possesses. Dan declares with a menacing gaze that he is willing to make the whole world his enemy. Sohai is suddenly startled by an overwhelming and chilling pressure. Sohai asks if he felt the strange energy, but Dan calmly claims he didn't feel a thing. Sohee begins to suspect that something is hidden beneath the surface. Believing only a master like herself could feel that energy, Sohee vows to find the hidden warrior who defeated the Black Faction. The next day arrives as Somi tightly holds Sohee's hand. Sohee asks if she is truly that excited, and a joyful Somi happily confirms it. Dan tells Sohee to focus on her business in Yueyang and not worry about Somi, leading Sohee to think he is being irresponsible as a father. Putting her doubts aside, Sohee kindly encourages Somi, hoping she will make many good friends at school. Somi smiles with pure joy, expressing her sincere hope that she will make many new friends. Sohai aggressively encourages Somi to use her strength to punch anyone who tries to bully her, and the young girl confidently agrees that she can handle it. Despite her bold advice, Sohee privately worries if a child as small and frail as Somi will truly be able to succeed at the school. Dressed in a beautiful new robe, Somi waves a cheerful goodbye to Sohee as she heads off to her first day of classes. After the school gates close with a heavy thud, Sohee lets out a long sigh of relief for successfully dropping her off. With Somi safely inside, Sohee decides it is the perfect opportunity to investigate the school grounds and look around. As Sohee walks through the courtyard, two mysterious, shadowy figures watch her every move from the darkness. Somi nervously introduces herself to the class and asks them to look after her during her time at the school. The classroom remains completely silent as the other students stare at her with cold and indifferent expressions. Somi quietly expresses her hope to get along with everyone, and the teacher tells her she may go take her seat. Somi cautiously walks through the room, looking around at her new classmates with a mixture of curiosity and sadness in her eyes. Suddenly, her eyes widen in surprise as she spots a familiar face among the students in the classroom. Hong Jinrang is surprised to see Somi standing there and can hardly believe his eyes. Somi happily exclaims that she knows him, while Jinrang turns away with an annoyed and resentful look. Meanwhile, Sohee rushes forward and excitedly declares that she has finally discovered the identity of the martial master working with the magistrate. Dan doubts she found the right person, but Sohai insists she is right after interrogating witnesses who saw the one who defeated the Black Faction. She claims she knows where they are staying and plans to track them down later that evening. Dan's gaze turns sharp and suspicious as he questions her mention of more than one person being involved. Sohee asks Dan if he has heard of the Hunan Five Swords, expressing her desire to recruit them into the Murim Alliance despite not knowing their identities. Dan feigns ignorance, claiming he has no idea who they are. Sohai reasons that because they have been inactive, even the Murim Alliance is unaware of them, suggesting they might have been operating in secret. Sohee excitedly realizes that reporting this information to the Murim Alliance will finally allow her to escape her life as a servant. Sohai celebrates her potential freedom, while Dan remains focused on his fishing in the background. Dan surprises Sohee by calmly stating that he will accompany her on her investigation. Dan explains that he is also curious to discover the true identities of the Hunan Five Swords. Sohai playfully agrees to take him along if he is well behaved, secretly hoping to receive a large reward upon their return. With a knowing smile, Dan agrees that it is time for them to go and investigate the situation. As night falls over the peaceful manor, Somi mentions that she has begun learning the 1,000-character classic. She happily tells Dan that although she doesn't fully understand her lessons yet, she is having a lot of fun at school. Dan warmly replies that he is glad to hear she is enjoying herself. Somi excitedly tells Dan about her first time holding a brush for calligraphy, and he listens while gently patting her head. As the night deepens over the massive estate, Dan continues asking Somi about what she did at school. Somi eventually falls into a deep and peaceful sleep after her long and tiring day. Dan quietly watches Somi fall asleep, as Sohee remarks that it seems she truly enjoyed her time at school. However, she notices something else and asks if he caught a specific detail in what Somi shared about her day. Dan's gaze turns sharp, as Sohee points out that Somi never mentioned making a single friend. A heartbreaking vision of Somi crying in isolation while other students whisper behind her back reveals the potential truth of her situation. Dan gently strokes her head and tries to reassure himself that it is only her first day of school. Sohee agrees that it might be too early to worry, but she questions if Dan is truly ready to join her in investigating the Hunan Five Swords base. Dan gently carries the sleeping Somi and promises to head out as soon as she is safely tucked into bed. The purple night sky hangs over a quiet and mysterious mountain landscape. A silent figure steps through the tall grass as they move stealthily through the darkness. Sohee and Dan confront a group of shadowy figures, questioning if they are the legendary Hunan Five Swords who defeated the Black Faction. The mysterious group remains evasive, claiming they have no idea what Sohee is talking about. Sohee confidently asserts that she has uncovered the truth about them protecting the magistrate and taking down the Black Faction. One of the figures dismisses her claims as nonsense and firmly tells her to turn back and leave. Sohee officially reveals her high-ranking position as the captain of the Miram Alliance's Phoenix Squad. She acknowledges their wish for privacy, but explains that the leader of the Miram Alliance personally wants to meet them. The mysterious warrior is surprised to hear that the powerful leader of the Miram Alliance is seeking them out, so he mentions the bounty on the Black Faction to convince them, while the figure wonders who could have leaked such information. The mysterious group confirms that they were indeed the ones responsible for taking down the Black Faction. Sohee is surprised by their admission and begins to ask for proof of their skills. The five warriors maintain a serious and intimidating presence as they face Sohee. Sohee privately doubts their strength, noting that their energy levels seem like second-rate martial artists she could easily defeat. She hesitantly asks the group if they can demonstrate the specific techniques they used during the battle. One of the warriors repeats her request with a look of confusion and growing suspicion. The warrior's expression turns cold as he asks Sohee if she is questioning their true capabilities. A sudden and powerful force shatters the ground into pieces, leaving Sohee and Dan completely stunned by the display. The warrior stares her down and asks once more if she still has any doubts about their power. Sohee is amazed by their silent strength and realizes that masters of this level can easily hide their true power from others. The bald warrior tells Sohee to leave if she doubts them, while she nervously explains that she only wanted to be certain of their identity. As the warrior orders them to go back, Sohee tries to stop him while Dan quietly investigates a nearby tree. Examining a broken branch, Dan suspiciously remarks that the technique used was remarkably impressive. Inside a building, someone questions the sudden appearance of a group known as the Hunan Five Swords. A muscular man discusses rumors about a secret group helping the magistrate after the Black Faction's defeat, noting that the name Hunan Five Swords appeared out of nowhere. He admits that he has never heard of this group before. His subordinate agrees, stating that they haven't heard of them either. Suddenly, a powerful hand strikes the subordinate's face with a violent impact. Furious, the muscular man demands to know if they think they are there for useless nonsense, forcing the dazed subordinate to offer a quick apology. He concludes that there is a high chance this mysterious group was responsible for attacking the Black Faction, while his subordinate remains silent. The enraged leader delivers a brutal kick to his subordinate, screaming at him for daring to ignore his commands. Deciding to handle the matter himself, the leader orders his men to track them down immediately as they shout their obedience. While bowing in submission, the bruised subordinate silently reflects on how he would have chosen a different master if given the opportunity. His eyes glow with a terrifying intensity as he vows that he would never choose to serve someone like his current lord. Sohee feels deep regret for having to leave without being able to say a proper goodbye to Somi. She explains her urgent need to introduce the Hunan Five Swords to the Miram Alliance as soon as possible, while Dan promises to pass on her farewell to the young girl. Dan suddenly tosses a heavy pouch towards Sohee, telling her to take it. Sohee is completely shocked to find a bag overflowing with gold coins when she only expected a few silver ones. Playfully teasing him, Sohee remarks that Dan's usually annoying face actually looks different and better today. She offers a sincere and final thank you for everything he has done for her. As she walks through the grand gate, Sohee tells him to take care of himself. A tearful Somi holds Dan's hand and sadly asks if she will never be able to see Sohee again. Dan cryptically explains that they will meet again if it is fated, but Somi struggles to understand what he means. Dan gives a gentle smile, realizing that the concept of fate is still a bit too difficult for the young girl to grasp. He reassures her that their connection hasn't been cut and they will likely meet again soon, leaving Somi hoping that he is telling the truth. So he begins to express a thought while Somi rests her head comfortably on her lap. Somi quietly admits that she sincerely hopes they can all live together. Dan asks Somi if her time at school has been going well for her so far. With a bright smile, Somi happily confirms that she is having a lot of fun. As he gently pats her head, Dan observes that getting along with others is not always an easy task. He encourages her by explaining that the people she meets now aren't the only ones she will know throughout her life. Somi tells him not to worry because she is his daughter and promises never to be intimidated no matter where she is. Dan gives a warm smile and praises her for being such a strong and resilient child. Dan reflects on how mature Somi is for a 7-year-old, though he privately worries that such maturity might not be the best thing for her. Dan Wuchen formally introduces himself to Somi and declares that from now on, she will be his daughter, Dan Somi. He vows to protect her regardless of the circumstances and encourages her to live her life completely free from fear. Somi repeats her new name to herself, her eyes wide with a mix of wonder and realization. Dan playfully pinches her cheek while asking if she understands his promise. Looking up at the lush green trees, Somi softly confirms that she understands everything he has said. The scene shifts to the bustling streets of the city, where the daily life of the citizens continues. The rhythmic sound of heavy footsteps echoes through the air as a group moves through the crowded area. Onlookers are startled by the sudden presence of martial artists, whispering among themselves in surprise. The muscular leader walks confidently through the street with his subordinates following closely behind him. Dan pauses while eating a snack, looking puzzled by the commotion happening around him. Dan lets out a low sound of intrigue as he senses something interesting from the muscular warrior. He silently acknowledges the powerful and impressive pressure being emitted by the muscular warrior. A subordinate reports to his captain that they have successfully located the Hunan 5 swords. The scout reveals that the group is currently positioned 5 kilometers to the north of Yueyang. The report continues, stating that the targets are heading directly toward Hubei at this very moment. Sohia leads the way as the group travels quickly through the woods. The leader grins with anticipation, eager to see exactly how strong this mysterious group really is. The muscular leader and his subordinates march out of their headquarters to begin the hunt. Dan Wuchen realizes he has caught on to something interesting after eavesdropping on their secret sound transmission. He repeats the location to himself, noting that they are 5 kilometers to the north. The sun begins to set, casting a warm glow over the distant mountain range. The sound of heavy, exhausted breathing fills the air as the group moves through the trees. Sohai remains far ahead, while the members of the Hunan 5 swords struggle to keep up with her pace. Sohei stops and looks back, noticing that the warriors behind her are gasping for air. Seeing their obvious fatigue, Sohei kindly asks if they would like to stop and take a break. The bald warrior tries to save face, sweating profusely while claiming they could easily walk for 3 whole days without any issues. Sohai offers a strained smile and suggests they use high-speed movement techniques if they aren't used to walking long distances. The bald warrior nervously insists he is fine, despite appearing visibly shaken. Sohai observes the group and realizes that their behavior is definitely suspicious. She recalls the incredible power she saw them display with her own eyes. Despite her doubts, Sohei decides to ignore her suspicions for the moment. But she is suddenly caught off guard by something unexpected. Sohai quickly draws her blade to deflect a barrage of hidden weapons flying toward her. The members of the Hunan 5 swords tremble in fear, wondering what just happened. Sohai looks up in shock as a group of powerful warriors appears on a tree branch above her. Sohei recognizes the intruders as members of the notorious martial emperor fortress. Recognizing the famous tyrant sword, Ma Dokjin, Sohai notes that it is an honor to meet such a well-known master. Ma Dokjin scoffs, amused that even the younger generation has heard of his reputation. Sohia identifies the man beside him as Quan Mujin, a master of the swift sword technique. Ma Dokjin demands to know if the people behind her are truly the ones who defeated the Black Faction. Sohai reassures herself that as long as the masters who defeated the Black Faction are by her side, everything will be okay as she prepares to introduce them. The terrified group frantically confirms their identity as the Hunan 5 swords, while desperately trying to scramble away in a cold sweat. Looking completely horrified and overwhelmed by the situation, Sohei begins to fear that she might not even survive the day. A few days ago, the group's leader believes they can finally strike it rich, despite the danger of dealing with the Murim alliance. Identifying himself as Ma Ilbung, he boasts about the unbreakable bond with his brothers and their perfect track record of success. He explains their plan to claim the massive bounty on the Black Faction leader before fleeing to the safety of China's western regions. When a subordinate expresses concern about the powerful Namgung clan, the leader dismissively scoffs at the threat. The group of frauds resolve to pull off a massive deception against the entire Murim alliance. Realizing their chance meeting with Namgung Sohye is a golden opportunity, the group prepares to use her mission to secure their future wealth. Namgung Sohye confronts the group, asking if they are truly the legendary warriors who dismantled the Black Faction. The leader wonders how their secret information was leaked while carefully maintaining his facade. With a confident look, he falsely confirms that they are indeed the ones responsible for subjugating the Black Faction. Sohye stands in awe, feeling a powerful presence as she believes she has finally found the hidden master she was searching for. The leader of the frauds confidently declares that their plan is finally a success. Sweating with intensity, he reminds himself that they cannot fail after coming so far, believing that since they fooled Sohye, Madokjin will be no problem. He arrogantly demands to know how mere unorthodox warriors dare to stand in their way. Madokjin finds the insult incredibly amusing and laughs loudly at the group's boldness. Releasing a powerful aura that forces everyone to cover their ears, Madokjin explains he traveled all the way from Shanxi and demands they show him the strength that defeated the Black Faction. Despite his subordinates' visible concern, the bald leader reassures his team that he will handle the situation. Drawing his glowing blade, he warns his opponent that his sword cuts everything and asks if he is truly prepared to die the moment he swings it. Unimpressed by the threat, Madokjin tells him to stop talking and bring on the fight already. Observing Madokjin, the bald leader Ma Il-wung remarks that the man seems to have absolutely no regard for his own life. With his eyes glowing with power, the bald leader prepares to launch his desperate strike. The bald warrior unleashes his supposed world-breaking sword technique, creating a massive explosion of white smoke. Sohye is caught off guard as she realizes the powerful attack was actually nothing more than a simple smokescreen. Fearing for his life, the bald leader screams at his brothers to run away as fast as they can. The group of frauds frantically flees into the woods, while a desperate Sohye shouts for them to stop and wait. From high up on a massive tree branch, Madokjin and Kwanmujin calmly observe the chaotic scene unfolding below them. Stunned by the sudden turn of events, Sohye stands frozen in complete disbelief, wondering what on earth just happened. Madokjin can hardly contain his amusement as he lets out a mocking scoff at the pathetic display. Madokjin bursts into hysterical laughter, mocking the Murim Alliance's future, and ridiculing the Phoenix Squad captain for being fooled by such pathetic frauds. Overcome with rage and humiliation, Sohye grits her teeth and finds the entire situation absolutely impossible to believe. Madokjin continues to laugh uncontrollably at the absurdity of the situation. His laughter quickly turns into cold fury as he resents being forced to waste his time and energy on such worthless opponents. With a terrifying look in his eyes, Madokjin issues a cold-blooded order for his men to kill every single person present. Madokjin's subordinates respond with a loud affirmation as they leap into action at his command. Madokjin arrogantly tells Sohye that she will have to entertain him if she wants to avoid a brutal and painful death. Kwanmujin stares at the dead fraud, feeling deep frustration that the powerful martial master he expected never appeared to challenge Madokjin. Enraged at being made a fool of by such pathetic idiots, Kwanmujin violently kicks the lifeless body while cursing his situation. A mysterious voice suddenly asks if the frauds are dead, catching Kwanmujin completely off guard and startling him. Dan Wuchun reveals himself in the middle of the dark forest, his body radiating a powerful and intimidating golden aura. Dan examines the wooden log used in the fraud's trick, admitting it was a pity they died because their deception was actually quite decent. With his eyes glowing with power, Dan remarks that it has been a long time since he has seen anyone fight as well as Kwanmujin. Kwanmujin is frozen in complete shock, feeling an overwhelming and terrifying pressure from the mysterious stranger. Sensing an immediate threat, Kwanmujin quickly leaps back to create distance and takes a defensive stance. Staring at the newcomer with intense suspicion and fear, Kwanmujin demands to know exactly who he is. Sohye struggles to block a powerful blow, amazed that her opponent can wield such a massive sword with incredible speed. She is overwhelmed by the sheer force of the tyrant sword's attack as they clash in the dark forest. Sohye realizes that Madokjin is not only strong enough to wield his giant blade with one hand, but is also terrifyingly fast. Madokjin delivers a crushing blow from above, mocking the Namgung clan for having such disappointing sword techniques. Gritting her teeth in pain, Sohye stubbornly insists that she is the only one who is weak and refuses to let him insult her clan. Madokjin is annoyed that she is still capable of talking back and mocks her family for becoming arrogant after producing a sword emperor. With a powerful shout, Madokjin unleashes a devastating strike. Sohye lets out a pained cry as the impact of the massive sword forces her to lose her grip. Her weapon is sent spinning through the air, leaving her completely defenseless against the tyrant sword. Gasping for air and bleeding from her mouth, Sohee looks up in shock as her opponent looms over her. Madokjin stands over his defeated opponent and declares that only the strong rule in Murim, demanding that losers stay silent and show respect to the victor. Sohee defiantly tells her opponent she would rather die than surrender, and he mockingly agrees to grant her final wish. The brutal leader unleashes a massive and powerful strike while shouting for her to die. A single silver coin suddenly hits the ground as a mysterious voice points out that someone left a piece of currency behind. Dan appears and questions why they are still in the city when they claim to be traveling toward a different region. Dan stands tall while dragging a defeated Quan Mujin, reminding his enemies that their own arrogance has blinded them to the truth of reality. Madokjin is puzzled and wonders what is going on with the mysterious man standing before him. Seeing that Dan easily defeated Quan Mujin, Madokjin admits that he must be quite strong. Madokjin warns Dan that he is far too fearless for his own good to come looking for him. Sohee is in total shock that Dan is strong enough to defeat a master, and wonders if he truly knows martial arts. A sudden realization hits Sohee as she begins to look back on their first meeting. She remembers encountering him for the first time while they were traveling toward Tianzi Mountain. Sohee recalls how the entire black faction was mysteriously subjugated shortly after that encounter. Frozen in disbelief, Sohee realizes that Dan might actually be the hidden master who took down the black faction alone. As Sohee asks who he really is, Dan calmly picks up her weapon and tells her he is borrowing it for a while. Sohee is shocked and warns Dan not to try fighting Madokjin alone. Dan calmly assures her that he will finish the battle quickly. With his sword ready, Dan challenges his opponent to bring on the fight. Madokjin is consumed by rage and calls Dan an arrogant bastard for his boldness. Swinging his massive weapon, Madokjin demands to know if Dan is aware of his true identity. Sohee desperately screams for Dan to dodge, fearing his thin sword cannot withstand the power of the great sword. She is certain that the small blade will be unable to block or survive his crushing strike. A massive explosion of energy erupts as the two powerful forces collide in the forest. As the dust settles, Madokjin repeats his demand, while Dan coolly replies that he knows him very well. Dan effortlessly blocks the massive blade and mocks his opponent for being nothing more than an overconfident weakling. Sohee watches in total disbelief, amazed that Dan could use her sword so effortlessly to stop the tyrant's sword. The two warriors engage in a high-speed and destructive clash that shakes the surrounding area. Madokjin is overcome with shock and frustration, unable to comprehend how Dan can fight him with such incredible ease. Dan finds it interesting that his opponent uses speed to compensate for the great sword's predictable nature, but he ultimately dismisses the idea as ineffective. He points out that focusing solely on speed has left his opponent's strikes lacking true strength and impact. The warrior reacts with a gasp, admitting he once felt limited by relying only on his weapon's massive weight. Furious, he questions how much Dan really knows about his struggle and the path he has taken. Calling him a brat, the warrior screams that he dedicated everything to increasing his striking speed to break through his limits. He prepares to unleash his full power with a final, desperate push. He declares that his goal was to swing his massive greatsword as easily as if it were a tiny twig. He is outraged that anyone would dare stand against his technique and questions Dan's boldness. He shouts in disbelief, feeling that his hard-earned power is being belittled by a stranger. He is devastated that all his years of effort seem to be failing in the face of such overwhelming strength. The warrior is left speechless as his devastating strike is once again stopped dead in its tracks. Dan coolly replies that he never looked down on his efforts, but points out the harsh reality of their gap. He bluntly states that his opponent's speed cannot match his own, and that the greatsword lacks the necessary power. As the tyrant's massive blade begins to shatter from the impact, he realizes the truth of his situation and freezes in sheer terror and shock. Dan explains that he was only pointing out how useless his opponent's struggle has become against a true master. Dan stands with absolute calm and focus as the final blow is delivered. He tells him to train for another 1,000 years before even thinking about challenging him in battle again. Sohee and Quan Mujin watch the scene in total disbelief as the overwhelming display of power unfolds before them. Coughing up blood, the defeated warrior finally realizes the overwhelming and impossible gap in their strength. Dan stands triumphantly over the fallen Madokjin, while a stunned Sohee looks on from the ground. Dan returns the sword to a shocked Sohee, dropping the weapon onto the ground before her. Gripping the earth with trembling hands, Sohee finally realizes that Dan was the one who single-handedly defeated the Black Faction. Overwhelmed with emotion, Sohee asks Dan why he kept his true identity a secret from her for so long. Dan coldly tells her to stop worrying about useless details, explaining that sometimes it is better to ignore what has been seen or heard. As he begins to walk away, Dan tells Sohee to simply consider her survival today as a great blessing. He reminds her that she is lucky to be alive after facing such a powerful opponent with the swordsmanship she was once so confident in. A silent and starry night sky settles over the quiet forest as the tension of the conflict begins to fade. The rhythmic sound of footsteps echoes through the woods as the mysterious master begins to depart. Another figure silently follows behind Dan as they move through the darkness. Kwon Mujin quietly trails behind Dan, keeping his head lowered as they make their way through the dark forest. Dan sharply notices Kwon Mujin trailing behind him and questions why he is being followed. The defeated master looks startled and nervous as he leans on a staff in the background. Hesitating for a moment, Kwon Mujin desperately pleads with the legendary master to let him remain by his side. While the world has many powerful warriors, very few could ever hope to treat a master like Ma Dokjin as if he were nothing more than a child. Gripping his fist in a moment of intense realization, he reflects on finally discovering the incredible person he has been searching for. Believing he has found the one master capable of leading him to greater heights, Kwon Mujin desperately begs to stay by his side. As the wind rustles through the dark forest, a nervous Kwon Mujin tentatively calls out to the silent master standing before him. When Kwon Mujin repeats his plea to join him, Dan Buchun gives a blunt and immediate refusal. Stunned by the master's cold response, Kwon Mujin can only stare in silence as he processes the rejection. Despite being told no once again, Kwon Mujin continues to insist on following the legendary warrior. With a look of absolute resolve, he declares that he will follow the master even if his request is denied. Dan Wuchun offers no further response, remaining completely silent in the face of the warrior's stubborn persistence. Kwon Mujin desperately pleads with the master, stating that if he is not accepted, he would rather be, but before he can finish. Without hesitation, Dan delivers a devastating blow that sends Kwon Mujin reeling in pain. Kwon Mujin collapses onto the ground, completely incapacitated by the single strike. Dan acknowledges the young warrior's impressive strength, but notes that there is something more to him. He notices a deep-seated hatred burning within the young man's gaze. Seeing that look, Dan reflects on how much it reminds him of his own past self. He recognizes the eyes of someone who is willing to do anything to reach greater heights of power. Dan contemplates that while pride is good, uncontrolled hatred makes a martial artist dangerous and short-lived. Dan disappears into the darkness of the forest with incredible speed. He looks back one last time, reflecting on the day's events. The entire situation brings back memories of the chaotic world of Jianghu he once knew. Suddenly, Kwon Mujin is jolted awake by a splash of cold water. He gasps and coughs, struggling to regain his composure after the sudden wake-up call. A voice notes his return to consciousness, leaving him startled and confused. Kwon Mujin finds himself tied up and surrounded by Ma Dokjin and the rest of the martial emperor fortress. He tries to figure out how he ended up in this dire situation. Ma Dokjin screams in a blind rage as he delivers a brutal blow to his supposedly traitorous subordinate. He continues the violent assault, reminding the young man that he saved his life and demanding to know why he is being repaid with such ungrateful betrayal. Despite the bloody beating, Kwon Mujin laughs mockingly and questions if his lord truly believes he was the one who raised him. He accuses Ma Dokjin of neglecting him like a common dog and claims the leader is only acting out because of petty professional jealousy. Ma Dokjin is furious that a subordinate would dare talk back, but the young warrior dismisses his authority and calls him worse than vermin for trying to kill his own men. Trembling with murderous intent, the leader tightly grips his weapon and prepares to silence the insolent swordsman once and for all. He vows to grant the traitor the most painful death imaginable as the rest of the martial emperor fortress watches the execution. In a sudden burst of movement, the injured warrior strikes out with incredible force and takes down one of the nearby subordinates. Ma Dokjin charges forward in a blind fury, determined to crush the one he considers nothing more than trash. The leader tries to maintain his composure, believing his opponent is slowed by internal injuries and looking for the perfect opening to end the fight. In a shocking turn of events, a flash of steel cuts through the air, leaving Ma Dokjin screaming in absolute agony. As his eyes are slashed by a desperate counterattack, a bare foot hits the ground with a sharp sound as Dokjin runs desperately through the night. An enraged Ma Dokjin screams at his subordinates to hunt down and kill the traitorous Kwon Mujin, who uses a burst of speed to escape into the woods. Gasping for air, Kwon Mujin pushes his body to the limit even as his vision begins to blur from his severe injuries. With bloodied feet stumbling over the earth, he refuses to allow himself to die in such a pathetic place. Covered in blood and struggling to breathe, he focuses all his remaining will on the singular goal of survival. Finally reaching his limit, Kwon Mujin collapses onto the ground while vowing that he must become the strongest to overcome his weakness. The next day, the bustling street market is filled with life as the citizens wonder where they should spend their time. A joyful Somi walks through the market holding hands with her new friend Jiak. while a silent and blushing Jinrang trails along beside them. A hand firmly grabs Jinrang's sleeve as Somi's voice calls out to him. Somi cheerfully suggests that they share some snacks, but an annoyed Jinrang complains about why he should buy them for her, and also says that dumplings are much more expensive than sweets. Somi mentions that their friend Jiak is hungry and wants to eat them, leaving Jinrang feeling pressured and frustrated. Jinrang reluctantly agrees to buy the dumplings, causing the girls to cheer with excitement in the background. While walking through the market, Somi is suddenly startled by the sound of heavy breathing nearby. Somi cautiously follows the sound, certain that she heard something coming from behind the wooden structures. She carefully peeks through a gap with wide eyes, her attention captured by something unexpected. As night falls over the city, glowing red lanterns light up the quiet streets under a starry sky. Dan stands in the middle of the bustling market, looking around restlessly and feeling that something is strange. He realizes that school ended a long time ago and begins to worry that something has happened to his daughter. Dan approaches a local merchant and urgently asks if he has seen any sign of his daughter. A friendly merchant recognizes Dan and informs him that his daughter was there with friends buying dumplings about 2 hours ago. Dan thanks him for the information and continues his search while the merchant watches him go. As he heads toward the dumpling store, he suddenly stops when he hears the sound of someone crying nearby. Standing under the pale moonlight, Dan's expression turns grim as he prepares for what he might find. A tearful and battered Somi looks up in shock, calling out to her father as she sits amidst blood and scattered debris. Dan asks what she is doing there so late, his gaze falling upon a collection of medicinal herbs she had gathered. Somi desperately begs her father to help the dying warrior as she tries to treat his wounds with the plants she found. Surrounded by her worried friends, Somi firmly declares her desire to save Kwanmujin's life. The 3 children look down at the injured man with a mix of curiosity and deep concern. Somi worries that the herbs aren't working, while Jinrang wonders if the man is a martial artist. Meanwhile, Jiyak tells Jinrang to step away from the body. The wounded warrior groans in pain as Somi gently touches his forehead to check on his condition. Somi quickly covers the man's mouth to keep him quiet as he lets out a muffled sound of distress. Jiyak suggests calling the constables for help, but Jinrang warns that the government avoids getting involved in the dangerous conflicts of martial artists. Somi stares at the broken man, sensing a deep connection to his suffering. She reflects on her own difficult past, remembering a time when she was just as helpless and lost as he is now. Her friends watch her closely as she hesitates for a moment before speaking. With a warm and determined smile, Somi firmly declares that she wants to save his life. Dan stands silently in the alleyway, looking down at his daughter as she desperately tries to care for the fallen warrior. His gaze turns sharp as he instantly recognizes the injured man lying before them. Kwanmujin lies unconscious and battered, his breathing shallow from the severe injuries he sustained during his escape. Dan recalls their earlier encounter in the forest, remembering how the desperate warrior had begged to follow him before being rejected. He questions his daughter, asking if she is truly intent on saving the life of the dying man. Somi firmly confirms her decision, prompting her father to ask for the reason behind her sudden compassion. With tears in her eyes, Somi explains that she was moved by how lonely and abandoned the man appeared to be. Overcome with emotion, Somi expresses her belief that the warrior is deeply afraid and desperate to survive. As Somi bursts into tears, Dan pulls her into a warm embrace and assures her that he understands her feelings. Dan tells the exhausted children to go rest at a nearby inn, promising that he will personally take responsibility for the injured man's recovery. Jinrang tells Somi it is time to go, while Jiyak comforts the crying girl and encourages her to stop. Dan looks toward the unconscious warrior and silently reflects on the man's condition. Looking down at the battered Kwanmujin, Dan notes that the fellow was incredibly lucky to have survived. A crescent moon hangs over the peaceful manor as the night deepens. Dan sits with Somi on his lap and asks why she appears to be so downcast. Somi looks up with a worried expression and asks if the injured man can truly be saved. Dan admits he isn't certain of the outcome, stating he has already done everything he possibly can for him. Sitting under the moonlight, Dan explains that the warrior's survival now depends entirely on his own strength. Somi looks off and expresses her sincere hope that the man makes it through his recovery. Dan reassures her that the man will survive if she works hard to look after him, leaving Somi surprised and hopeful. Dan smiles at his daughter and tells her the man will be fine because she's a child blessed with great luck. Somi asks what he means by great luck, but Dan simply tells her not to worry about it with a laugh. Determined to help, Somi rushes off to nurse the injured warrior back to health. Samtai points out that the man is already half dead, and worries that Somi will be even more heartbroken if he doesn't make it. Dan acknowledges her potential sadness, but suggests the man might survive and bring her joy, while a skeptical Samtai bets all his assets on the man's death. Dan is completely taken aback and asks if Samtai is actually serious about such a massive wager. Dan calmly asks whether he is truly prepared to lose everything if the warrior survives. Samtai starts to sweat as he realizes Dan is intentionally baiting him into a dangerous gamble. Looking at Dan's confident expression, Samtai begins to fear that the injured man might actually pull through. Samtai quickly tries to laugh it off as a joke, but Dan simply remarks that it is a pity he isn't serious. Despite Samtai's grumbling doubts about the man's survival, Dan remains silent with a knowing smirk on his face. As Somi tenderly prays for the warrior's recovery, Dan asks Samtai if he has ever heard of a child born with extraordinary luck. Dan explains that in very rare cases, some individuals are born completely devoid of any internal energy. He continues by describing those who are instead born with the divine blessings of a star. These blessed individuals often face a lifetime of extreme misfortune until the moment their true luck finally begins to shine. Dan reflects that such luck often follows tragedy, like losing parents, but meeting him has finally caused Somi's great luck to manifest. He concludes that now, even the things she touches will be blessed by her incredible fortune. A few days later, the crescent moon hangs over the peaceful manor as colorful fish swim through the calm waters of the pond. Kwon Mujin groans as he slowly regains consciousness, his eyes flickering open while he lies in a bed. He looks around the unfamiliar room in confusion and is struck by the sudden realization that he has actually survived his lethal injuries. Somi suddenly appears by his side, startling the wounded warrior as she happily exclaims that he is finally awake. Looking at the young girl with a dazed expression, he wonders if she was the one responsible for saving his life. Somi joyfully explains that while she was the one who found him, her father was the true savior who treated his wounds. Laughing with relief, Somi rushes out of the room to tell her father and Samtai the good news, while the startled warrior tries to stop her. Kwon Mujin is left completely baffled, struggling to understand the strange mention of a father and someone referred to as Mr. Slave. Meanwhile, at the same time, the massive moon illuminates the grand and imposing structures of a powerful organization. Deep within the headquarters of the Murim Alliance, Namgung Sohye kneels before a high-ranking master. The leader of the alliance, Sword Emperor Namgung Chun, asks his granddaughter if she has successfully located the master who defeated the Black Faction. Sohye remains silent as she reflects on the warning that there are moments when one must ignore what they have witnessed in the world. She recalls the terrifying display of power she saw in the forest and realizes that the truth is far more complicated than she expected. Sohye solemnly confirms the situation with a serious expression. With a look of intense resolve, she reports that she has discovered the person they were looking for. Sohye reports that she has finally found the person they were looking for, leaving the leader surprised. The leader questions if she truly found the one who defeated the Black Faction, and asks why she returned by herself. Sohye remains silent, appearing deeply conflicted and troubled by her report. He asks if the mysterious master explicitly refused to join the Murim Alliance. With a heavy heart, she confirms that the man rejected their recruitment. She conveys the master's message that the alliance should sometimes ignore the truth even when they know it. Intrigued by the refusal, the leader asks about the extent of the man's strength. Sohye reveals that even a powerful master like the Tyrant's Sword was completely helpless against him. The leader is stunned to hear that a top-ranked master of the Martial Emperor Fortress was treated like a mere child. He ponders why such a powerhouse would reject the alliance, wondering if he belongs to the demonic faction or simply seeks a quiet life. Chun prepares to share one more detail from the report. He recounts how the mysterious master insulted his legendary swordsmanship by calling it full of conceit. Overcome with sudden rage, the Sword Emperor slams his fist down while cursing the man's audacity. Recalling how precious Sohye is to him, he fumes with anger that anyone would dare speak so rudely to his beloved granddaughter. Despite the insult, he admits the stranger discovered things even he couldn't and finds the situation interesting before dismissing Sohye to get some rest. In a quiet room, a bandaged hand reaches toward the ceiling as someone realizes they are still alive. Kwon Mujin reflects on his narrow escape from a helpless death with a weak, disbelieving laugh. He resolves that he can still achieve his goals as long as he remains among the living. He vows to do whatever it takes to become even stronger in martial arts, but is suddenly startled by a voice asking if he is awake. Dan stands over him, noting that since he is moving normally, his recovery should be going well. Kwon Mujin is struck with total shock as he recognizes the man from their previous encounter. He calmly introduces himself to the recovering warrior as Dan Woo-chun. He explains that he is the young girl's father and the one who saved his life, while a flashback shows Somi desperately digging for medicinal herbs. The warrior is stunned to be alive, but Dan tells him his gratitude should go to Somi, as she is the reason he survived. The swordsman quietly acknowledges the truth of the situation. In a memory of her kindness, Somi excitedly prepares the herbs to help him heal, as the warrior reflects on the life he now owes. Dan observes the injuries and notes that the man was clearly betrayed and attacked by his own people. He reflects on the harsh reality of the martial world, where betrayal is a common tool for survival. A vision of the ambush appears as Dan suggests the man shouldn't judge his comrades too harshly for choosing their own survival. The warrior somberly admits that he understands the brutal logic of his former allies. Dan remains silent, allowing the weight of the realization to settle. He sternly tells the man to leave his past behind and forget everything that happened. He warns that a heart full of hatred will only lead to a weak and easily broken sword. The warrior promises to remember the lesson as Dan orders him to stay and recover, warning that he is too weak to survive on his own. Dan makes it clear that he won't be living for free and expects him to work in exchange for his recovery. The bandaged warrior humbly agrees and expresses his final thanks as he is left alone in the room. Kwon Mujin rests in bed while recovering from his severe injuries. He reflects on the unexpected kindness shown to him by Dan Wuchun and his daughter. The next day arrives with the rhythmic sounds of work echoing through the manor. Samtae watches with a look of silent judgment as the new guest begins his chores. Kwon Mujin continues his physical labor despite his exhaustion. Samtae frantically rushes over to stop Kwon Mujin from ruining the laundry. He scolds the warrior for being too rough, warning that his aggressive pace will turn the clothes into rags. Kwon Mujin tells him to stop lecturing and work himself, but Samtae insists his only job is to monitor him. Samtae arrogantly declares his superiority, claiming he is not a mere servant like the newcomer. Privately, Samtae reflects on how happy he was to get a new slave to handle the chores after Sohee left. However, he is quickly frustrated by how incompetent the warrior is at basic household tasks. Wiping away his sweat, Kwon Mujin wonders why he is being forced to do chores when Samtae is the servant here. Samtae scolds the newcomer, reminding him of the master's orders to work for his stay. He arrogantly claims seniority, demanding that the new servant obey his commands. The warrior flatly refuses to follow any orders from Samtae. He challenges the former thief to a fight if he truly wants to be in charge. Samtae drags the warrior to the back of the manor for a confrontation. The swordsman remains unfazed, questioning if such a weak threat is supposed to scare him. Terrified for his life, Samtae sprints away while screaming for the master's help. He complains that the new guest is incredibly rude and is actively trying to kill him. The two engage in a chaotic chase through the manor grounds. Samtae desperately calls out for Somi to save him from the enraged warrior. Samtae smugly boasts about his superior speed, mocking the famous swordsman for being unable to catch him. He ridicules Kwon Mujin's reputation, claiming he isn't as impressive as the rumors suggest. Consumed by cold fury, the warrior vows that Samtae will be dead meat the moment he is finally caught. The chase is suddenly interrupted as the manor's main gate bursts open with a loud thud. Samtae is left speechless as he finds himself face to face with Magistrate Hong and a group of guards. Samtae screeches to a halt in total surprise at the magistrate's sudden arrival. A grim-looking Magistrate Hong calls out to Samtae. Meanwhile, Samtae asks why Hong is suddenly here. Holding up a wanted poster, Magistrate Hong furiously demands that the criminal prepare to answer for their actions. A subordinate presents the monthly reward log for information to the magistrate. Magistrate Hong reflects on how hidden bandits are likely becoming active now that the Black faction is gone, and begins reviewing the list. He is suddenly struck with shock as he recognizes a familiar face on one of the wanted posters. Infuriated, he recalls the man's past disrespect toward his own master, and vows to personally teach him a harsh lesson. Magistrate Hong arrives at the manor with a group of guards, looming over a startled Samtae. He aggressively orders the criminal to prepare to answer for his actions, leaving Samtae completely bewildered. Samtae panics, wondering if his past robberies were discovered, but decides to feign ignorance and questions if the magistrate is suffering from heatstroke. Samtae continues to protest, but the magistrate refuses to listen, accusing him of committing misdeeds while hiding behind Dan's protection. With a look of absolute determination, Magistrate Hong draws his blade to carry out his sentence. As the magistrate declares his intent to end the criminal, Dan Wuchun suddenly appears and delivers a crushing blow that stops him in his tracks. Dan Wuchun calmly asks about the ongoing commotion, while a startled Magistrate Hong calls out to him in surprise. An indignant Zhang Samtae lifts the magistrate into the air, questioning if he lost his mind after barging in and demanding answers for Samtae's past actions. Samtae boldly declares his innocence and purity, but his current expression only makes him look more suspicious to those watching. Magistrate Hong aggressively presents a wanted poster, demanding an explanation for the damning evidence it contains. Samtae is shocked to see his own name listed on a poster for heinous crimes like murder and trafficking, while an innocent Somi asks what the paper says. While the magistrate brands him as complete trash for murder and trafficking, Dan casually replies, "It's you, alright, just confess already." He then mocks Samtai by asking when he removed the mole from the criminal's portrait, leaving Samtai completely bewildered by the absurd accusation. Somi fiercely defends her friend, declaring that Mr. Slave is a good person who would never commit such terrible acts. Somi continues her passionate defense, arguing that the portrait must be a mistake because she knows Mr. Slave isn't a bad man. Refusing to accept the evidence, Somi loudly suggests that the criminal simply happens to share the same name as him. Deeply moved by the young girl's unwavering faith in him, he finds a new sense of resolve to clear his name. Samtai heroically vows to personally capture the real criminal to prove his innocence, and a supportive Somi eagerly offers to join him on his mission. Grateful that Somi is the only one who truly believes in him, Samtai and the young girl set off together to find the truth. Somi calls out to her companion while walking through the peaceful woods. The young girl looks down with a confused expression, wondering about their destination. Samtai continues walking in silence with Somi on his shoulders, leaving her questioning his behavior. Internally panicking, Samtai realizes he has no plan and struggles to find the words to tell Somi the truth. He regrets bringing her along, but feels pressured to succeed now that she has placed all her hopes in him. Looking at the wanted poster, he is horrified by the resemblance and begins to doubt his own innocence. Dan Wuchen suddenly appears behind them, demanding an explanation for their strange behavior. The legendary master looms over them from a high branch, startling both Somi and the nervous Samtai. Samtai awkwardly tries to justify his actions by claiming he was heading toward the local gambling dens. Dan's gaze turns cold and menacing as he hears the suggestion of bringing his daughter to such a place. Dan jumps down from the tree branch while Somi wonders why she is not allowed to go. He gently reassures her that she can visit such places only after she grows up. Dan hands his daughter over to a startled Kwon Mujin, promising to return for her after she spends the day playing in the city. Somi is overjoyed by the news. Dan watches as Somi excitedly leads Mujin away to go eat dumplings. Samtai solemnly insists that he was not the one responsible for the crimes mentioned. Dan says he believes him because he doesn't think Samtai is brave enough to commit such crimes. Confused, Samtai then asks why Dan kept insisting that the criminal looked like him. Dan reveals that he was only joking, leaving Samtai fuming with rage over the teasing. He dismisses the conversation and decides it is time to stop overthinking and take action. Dan notes that the criminal was involved in both opium and human trafficking. Deciding the simplest solution, he resolves to capture and interrogate everyone connected to the opium and human trafficking operations. Samtai wonders if bandits are truly the ones capable of committing such heinous and organized crimes. Dan explains that bandits are easy to track because they always stay in one place unless the government intervenes. With a cold and focused gaze, Dan demands to know exactly where these bandits can be found. The journey leads them to the rugged and imposing peaks of Yahello Mountain. The sound of steady footsteps echoes through the woods as the group continues their journey deep into the mountains. Dan notes that the location is much more pleasant than he had initially expected. Dan reflects that it might have been better to build a home in this area, while Samtai sarcastically agrees that the presence of swarming bandits makes the place truly fantastic. Dan narrows his eyes in suspicion, questioning if he detected a hint of sarcasm in Samtai's previous comment. Samtai begins to tremble with intense anxiety, silently cursing his situation as his fear begins to take over. Overwhelmed by terror, Samtai screams that he is terrified of entering a bandit's den and fears for his life as a lowly third-rate martial artist. He resentfully accuses Dan of ignoring his training while teaching everyone else in the household. Samtai continues his tirade, reminding Dan of all the chores he handles and complaining that Dan only pays attention to Somi and Kwon Mujin. Dan watches with a completely unimpressed look as his disciple pours out his frustrations. Amused by the display of internal jealousy, Dan laughs and acknowledges all the hard work Samtai has done for the manor. He then asks his disciple whether there is anything specific he wants in return for his efforts. Dan acknowledges Samtai's hard work and asks if there is anything he wants, leading Samtai to begin his request. Inspired by the power of true masters, Samtai passionately declares that he wants to become stronger as well. Dan calmly accepts the request and simply tells his disciple to go ahead and try getting stronger. Samtai is left completely bewildered by the short response, wondering if that was really all his master had to say. Suddenly, a volley of arrows rains down from the sky, catching the pair off guard. Samtai is startled as he realizes they are being targeted by an incoming barrage of arrows. Dan moves with incredible speed to protect his disciple from the sudden and deadly ambush. Samtai screams in pure terror as two arrows land right between his legs, narrowly missing him. Samtai is completely overwhelmed by the sudden barrage of arrows sticking out of the ground. A startled voice of a bandit cries out in frustration as the ambush unfolds. He resents that the group didn't just die from the arrows and realizes that they have made some trouble now. Samtai looks up and wonders who is approaching them now. A group of armed mountain bandits completely surrounds the terrified Samtai. Samtai realizes with horror that they have run straight into a group of dangerous mountain bandits. He realizes they found the bandits much sooner than expected, but tries to stay calm. He looks over at his master, who's lying on the ground with several arrows sticking out of him. Samtai stares in confusion at the master's motionless body. Dan delivers a flat and unconvincing performance, claiming that he is in pain and currently dying. Samtai questions his master's behavior, but Dan insists he was hit by an arrow and can no longer move. While a bandit demands all their belongings, Samtai desperately whispers for Dan to stop the ridiculous act and help him. Dan reminds his disciple that he was the one who asked for the chance to become stronger. Samtai is stunned as he realizes the true purpose behind his master's sudden injury. The enraged bandits attack, screaming at them for ignoring their demands. Samtai realizes that he is being forced to learn through a real-life battle. He's frustrated to see his master hasn't moved an inch and truly has no intention of helping. Surrounded by a massive crowd of bandits, Samtai prepares to see what he is truly capable of. Samtai takes a firm martial arts stance, declaring that he refuses to give up without a fight. One of the mountain bandits lets out a mocking laugh at the young man's boldness. The bandit mocks Samtai's resolve, pointing out that his companion appears to be dead and suggesting he should just surrender. Infuriated by the bandit's words, Samtai questions their vision and insults their intelligence for believing his master is actually dead. The bandit reacts with pure shock and growing rage at the young man's insolent reply. Losing his temper, the bandit charges forward while questioning if the boy has completely lost his mind. Samtai reminds himself that his superior speed has allowed him to defeat much stronger enemies and dismisses the bandits as common criminals. He realizes that if he truly wants to become a master, he can no longer afford to run away from a challenge. Activating his high-speed movement technique, Samtai's feet glow with blue energy as the bandit prepares to strike. Using his incredible agility, Samtai effortlessly dodges a lethal axe swing from the charging bandit. The bandit is completely confused by the movement and frantically looks around to find where his opponent has disappeared to. He begins to realize that the speed he just witnessed is at a completely different level than anything he has ever seen. Samtai delivers a swift blow to the bandit's back, mocking the man's speed by claiming it is even slower than a simple finger flick from his master. The bandit lets out a pained cry as he feels the full force of the unexpected strike. The archers are stunned by the display of agility and question what is wrong with the mysterious warrior. Samtai tightly clenches his fist as he feels the impact of his successful attack. He is thrilled to see that his efforts have actually worked and feels a sudden surge of confidence in his own abilities. He reflects on how his lack of strength prevents him from causing major damage, but realizes that real-world experience is truly the best teacher. Samtai's gaze turns sharp as he suddenly senses an incoming threat. Another volley of arrows strikes the ground with a sharp thud, narrowly missing their target. Using his high-speed movement technique, Samtai leaps high into the air and leaves the bandits below completely bewildered. An archer startled by a sudden sound as someone moves toward him with incredible speed. The archer screams in terror as Samtai dives toward him from the sky. Samtai delivers a brutal punch directly to the bandit's face. The attack sends him reeling and leaves a trail of white light streaking through the air. The force of the impact slams the archer into the earth, creating a massive crater in the ground. The bandit is left unconscious in the dirt, causing his comrades to shout in alarm that their archer has been defeated. Samtai pauses for a moment, sweating from the exertion, but keeping his focus on the remaining enemies. He smiles with confidence, resolving to keep up his momentum and finish the fight. An arrow whistles past his head, but Samtai uses his incredible speed to dodge the projectile. The arrows barely miss him, leaving shallow injury marks behind. The bandit leader dismisses Samtai as a weakling who only relies on qinggong and speed, then orders his men to surround him, prompting a loud response from his subordinates. Samtai is caught off guard as a group of bandits suddenly surrounds him. Feeling the pressure, Samtai nervously questions his next move while maintaining a defensive stance. From his position on the ground, Dan mentally instructs his disciple to move 2 steps to the right. Samtai is startled by the sudden advice, but immediately prepares to follow the instruction. Focusing his energy, Samtai quickly executes the move by taking 2 steps to the right as directed. The maneuver allows Samtai to effortlessly dodge a lethal sword strike from one of the bandits. The bandit is left completely stunned, unable to believe that his target successfully evaded the attack. Seizing the opening, Samtai delivers a devastating punch that leaves the bandit reeling in total shock. Thrilled by his progress, Sentai begins to realize his own potential as he continues to overwhelm his enemies.